Namaste and greetings. I, Naina Agarwal, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, प्रभाव एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान नई दिल्ली, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Learning. Today, we are gathered here for day one of a 3-day immersive online legal awareness and certificate training program on reproductive and conjugal rights of women in India. This training program is organized by IMPRI Gender Impact Study Center, GISC, New Delhi. Now, let me give you a brief background on the training course on reproductive and conjugal rights of women in India. No woman can call herself free who does not have control over her own body. Although India takes pride in being among the first countries in the world to develop legal and policy frameworks guaranteeing access to abortion and contraception, women and girls continue to experience significant barriers to the full enjoyment of their reproductive, conjugal, as well as matrimonial rights. This includes poor quality, health services, and denial of decision-makings. India's matrimonial laws touch down several aspects of sexuality and reproduction, including the role of sex and reproduction in marriage. In their various pronouncements, the judicial system of India has recognized sexual and reproductive autonomy as an inalienable right of an individual. Despite these challenges of women's sexual and reproductive autonomy continue to exist in practice. This 3-day training course will enlighten the participants with the nuances of the reproductive and conjugal rights of women in India. The entrenched issues like restitution of constitutional rights and its implication on rights to sexual and reproductive autonomy and health, denial of sex within marriage perceived as cruelty, marital rape, and so on will be dealt with. Reproductive rights are essential to the realization of all human rights encompassing a spectrum of civil, political, economic, and social rights. Horizons like these will also be discussed. This course will be conducted by expert resource person comprising legal practitioners, civil society activists, professionals, and academics. It is a high time that Indian society realizes that marriage, whether it be a statement or contract, does not result in ceding of the autonomy of one spouse to another. This session will be chaired by Professor Vibhuti Patel, visiting distinguished professor, IMPRI. Our convener is Dr. Simi Mehta, CEO and Editorial Director, IMPRI. This 3-day training program has an excellent panel of members who will be sharing knowledge on the above theme. The distinguished panel of members for this program are Professor Dr. Saumya Uma, Advocate Dr. Albertina Almeida, Dr. Amar Jesani, Advocate Dr. Shalu Nigam, Professor Vijay Lakshmi Nanda, Professor Veena Vaswani, Professor Mala Ramanathan, Advocate Audrey D. Mello, Advocate Mrunalini Deshmukh. I welcome all of you to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for being interested and putting your time, energy, and efforts into understanding the emerging issues, considering the impact of policies in promoting gender equality, women empowerment, and accentuating legal awareness, and thus helping us to bring together the practitioners and participants through this course for impactful policy research and action. Before we start today's session, I would like to announce the housekeeping announcement once again. Please join the meeting on time. There will be a Q&A session after each presentation. Share your question on Q&A chat box and not on the chat box. The question must not be posted as an anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise. Refrain from making any general comment in the question to save time. Now, without any further ado, I would like to invite Professor Vibhuti Patel to start the session with her opening remarks and start with our further expert session. Looking forward to the extreme gathering, and ma'am, over to you.
Can you listen to me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you, Ms. Naina Agarwal, for your welcome address. And first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Arjun Kumar, Dr. Simi Mehta, Ms. Naina Agarwal, and Fiza Mahajan for their hard work. And I welcome Dr. Veena Vaswani, Dr. Shalu Nigam, Dr. Mala Ramnathan, and Dr. Vijaya Lakshmi, today's panelists and esteemed participants. Why we chose this topic? We all know that reproductive rights are the rights of individuals to decide whether to reproduce and have reproductive health. This may include individuals' right to plan a family, to decide how many children to have, at what interval, whether to have children or not, terminate a pregnancy, use contraceptives, learn about sex education in public schools, and gain access to reproductive health services. Rights of all couples and individuals to decide freely and responsibility the number, spacing, and timing of their children. It also includes right to information and means to do so, right to the highest standards of reproductive health, and right to make decisions concerning reproduction free of discrimination or coercion or violence. So India is among the first countries in the world to have adopted a family planning policy. We all must understand that the difference between birth control and family planning. I think Dr. Veena Vaswani also will tell us that birth control is a couple's decision of what kind of contraception they want to use and what kind of methods that they want to adopt to build their family. While when it comes to family planning, it is the state deciding what kind of reproductive measures that they would take to have either a pro-natalist policy or anti-natalist policy. What is the attitude to the abortion? Currently, we are seeing in America, a major struggle is going on where the women's rights groups are fighting against repeal of abortion right of women. So in India, when it comes to family planning policy, the access to abortion and contraception, women and girls continue, that is granted. But in reality, women and girls continue to experience significant barriers to full enjoyment of their reproductive rights, including poor quality of health services, denial of women's and girls' decision-making authority. And historically also, what we have seen is that reproductive health-related legislations and policies in our country have failed to take women's rights-based approach. Instead, focus is either on a democratic target of attaining population stabilization or a reduction in total fertility rate. So that has been the concern, not the concern of reproductive health, women's bodily integrity, women's dignity. While it also implicitly or explicitly undermines women's reproductive autonomy through discriminatory provisions such as a spousal consent requirement for access to reproductive health services, despite a national law penalizing marriages of girls below 18 years of age, the policies and schemes guarantee women's maternal health care. In practice, India continues to account for highest number of child marriages. Currently, 1/5 of girls are married and they become child mothers. Maternal deaths in India is one of the highest. Even Africa has surpassed us in terms of maternal health. But India has an extremely high maternal mortality. So India's population policy guarantees women voluntary access to full-fledged contraceptive methods. In practice, state governments continue to introduce schemes promoting female sterilization, including through targets leading to coercion, risky substandard sterilization procedures, and denial of access to non-permanent methods. And several states have imposed two-child norms, which has also penalized women from the Dalit, Adivasi, and religious minority communities who are poor and where the child mortality rate is extremely high. Conjugal rights of women are closely linked to reproductive rights. That's why in this immersive course, we have taken reproductive and conjugal rights together. Conjugal rights are the entitlements of a person to live with his or her spouse, right to live with dignity and self-respect. A wife has a right to live her life with dignity and have the same lifestyle that her husband enjoys and even the in-laws enjoy. She also has the right to live free of mental or physical torture. Right to child maintenance. Husband and wife must provide for their minor children. The conjugal rights deal with marriage, divorce, parental and matrimonial property rights, alimony, judicial separation, maintenance of divorced women, custody of child or children. And in India, we have religious family laws that define conjugal rights of women. We also have more than 30,000 customary laws that are governed by the Community Council. What the Constitution of India grants as per the fundamental rights gets eroded at times because of the discriminatory religious and community-based customary laws. For past 50 years, thousands of Indian women have challenged discriminatory conjugal laws and the double standards for men and women in the Sessions Court, High Court, and Supreme Court of India. With this historical backdrop of reproductive health concerns as well as the conjugal rights concerns, this immersive course is taking place to be cognizant of to make the participants cognizant of the nuances of reproductive and conjugal rights of women in India. Today's 4 presentations also deal with both the aspects, and our first speaker today, who is going to provide the overall macro picture, is Dr. Veena Vaswani. Over to Dr. Veena Vaswani.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now I would like our expert, Professor Veena Vaswani, to start the session. Professor Vaswani is Director, Center for Ethics, and Professor, Department of Forensic Medicine and Toxicology, Yenenpua University, Mangalore. Ma'am's topic is Reproductive Justice and Public Health Concerns. Very warm welcome to you, ma'am, and thank you again for joining us from Germany. And despite having time difference and your busy schedule, now over to you, ma'am.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
We can't see you.
Yeah, because there's a lot of light reflecting from this. There's a huge light that's coming in from all windows. So I'm unable to close that. We just moved into new house. Yeah. So if you excuse me, I will keep this.
I mean, it was working fine. You can keep it on.
Is that okay? Is that okay? Then I can go into. Okay, I was thinking it was looking a lot of only ghostly image. Okay, thank you very much. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Vibhuti madam, Dr. Arjun, Dr. Simi for having me on this particular talk, because it is at the end of this, I feel more enriched, more of a participation, listening to others as much as speaking, because speaking is only a part-time gain for me, but the full-time advantage is listening to a star-lit galaxy of experts who are called out here. So the participants, you should really have a cerebral feast, asking questions and getting clarifications done. So with that note, I start my presentation on reproductive justice and public health concerns. When I'm speaking before you, I have 2 lenses that I bring into the focus. One, being a medical officer at the postpartum center. So when I used to advise contraceptives, when I used to literally force on people, why don't you take property? Why don't you do this? And then I'm also aware of the fact that government in between stopped the contraception production of Maladi. And then when people started asking us, what happens? You were giving us, now you are not giving anymore. I felt a moral calling to purchase it in bulk and give it to them as though it's the government's subsidy. Because the question is, when you advocate something with passion, when you put your passion into it, then the shortcuts don't work. But what governments must realize is there are adults making a decision of family planning. And here we cannot say that you should do this, you should do that. And then in between say that this is not okay, this is okay because we don't have a supply. So one, the consistency. Second, the well-being of a person in his own hands. And three, the encouraging nature of contraception than making it totally compulsory this way or that. So I have been hurt a lot of times after tubectomy when they lose a child and come back crying that I only one child left. In fact, there was in Maharashtra, after the first girl child, if you got tubectomy done, government gave you 8,000 rupees. So with this 8,000 rupees, the lady has gone and then come back in 9 months that she has lost that child. So this is where we feel the oppressive nature of a contraception should not be so much to the extent that it makes a mental wreck of a lady. So reproduction is a beautiful thing. Falling in love is a beautiful thing. But the question is, do not make it so oppressive that people have to develop such neurosis about having a male child or having too many female children and so on. So my first part is going to be on this disadvantage of being a woman. And this I'm bringing again from personal perspective as well as a literature, locating reproductive right within public health, lessons learned from COVID-19 pandemic. And this time and again, IMPRI has been organizing. We have been much enriched by this information, what needs to change, and some concluding remarks. I request that when the time is up, please let me know, because sometimes we have a way of going on and on with a good audience. So this should not happen. Now, starting with the structural dimensions of inequality all over the world. Women have much lesser power and resource as compared to men. In some countries, there are laws which allow inheritance of only property, even from inherited property. Of course, these days times have changed, but from father to son. And no question asked because a lady gets dowry in marriage, so it is compensated for. The structural dimensions of a gender has an impact on both. I'm not saying only on women, both men and women and their longevity. The structural dimension of gender refers to the unequal division of resources. And these inequalities are assigned and they have a religious, social, financial structures in place which make sure that the gap remains. It doesn't get breached. Now, even when women come to wards with the complaints of gynecologic or obstetrics, their pain is much, much underestimated. This is a case study where a woman was ignored as she cried out in pain. She had a long obstructed labor for 33 hours. She wanted epidural, but when epidural was given, it fell off. It didn't go into her, but then she was literally had to bear the trauma even without the epidural. Dozens of women complain of severe pain in the vaginal walls because when you're doing an egg retrieval as a part of artificial reproductive technique, the needle pierces the vaginal wall, but the person who is doing it is not aware. And he feels the complaint is only exaggerated. Don't worry, this happens all the time. This is what we say. They are told that pain is normal, but in actuality, sometimes even saline is given instead of anesthesia. So women in pain are not taken as seriously as men. Why are women's pain dismissed so easily? Middle-aged women with chest pain and symptoms of heart disease are twice likely to be diagnosed with mental illness or malingering than compared with men with same symptoms. This is one case study of Eileen Ruhoy. She's a 53-year-old neurologist, and she started developing severe throbbing pain in the head. It was so throbbing and it was not bearable from 2012 onwards, but she was not sent for CT MRI. because in some of the institutional setups, even for the insurance to cover it, your doctors need to advise it to you. And only in 2015 was she allowed a scan. And what did it reveal? A tennis ball sized tumor in the brain with a lot of secondaries, and it was inoperable. Now this person has been a neurologist herself. Where is the credibility of her pain? Women's symptoms are not taken seriously. There is a pain gap, but there is also a credibility gap. Women are not to be believed about their bodies, period. If they talk about pain, people think they're less pain, but they're exaggerating more. So in the face of existing inequality in the healthcare system, there's always a difference. Access to resource, status, well-being, for any particular thing you say, there has always been a gap, and gender disparities in health, in mortality, life expectancy, burden of disease, mental health, uninsured and underinsured, and lack of access to care. These are already existing. And on this, now we are talking about the reproductive justice. So reproductive rights are centered around only legal rights or access to reproductive health care services for abortion and birth control. But that doesn't stop only there. What is good if a right gives you a right, but not an access to the healthcare, as in emergency, as in pandemics? So what good is all these rights together? Reproductive justice links reproductive rights with social, political, economic inequalities that affect a woman's ability to access reproductive care services. The core component of reproductive justice include equal and access to safe abortion, affordable contraception, comprehensive sex education, as well as freedom from sexual violence. Now, this is one particular thing. As a doctor, and having been trained in gynecology, house surgery for 1 year for MTP, I'm aware of the prejudice the lady doctors carry to the table when they're doing termination of pregnancy. If it's an unmarried girl, then a lot of prejudice. Who asked her to have fun and things like that. I'm aware of a time when a lady was not given anesthesia just so that she will not come back again. Let her know what the pain is like. So this is somewhere when we think of reproductive justice, we don't always look at it in the black and white, men versus women, but it is the mentality we carry about reproductive rights and the safety that we need to be giving, which we are not giving. Existing sexual and reproductive health and justice inequities disproportionately impact health, well-being, economic stability of girls, and also vulnerable population. People whose human rights are least protected are more likely to experience these difficulties in pandemic. As a result, there is a heavy burden on economic, social disparity, and access is the missing link to the access is the only missing link. You talk of a lot of rights, but you don't give them access. For instance, talking about aggregation of reproductive rights and social justice. So it's an intersectional way in which a lot of rights coincide with each other and they intermingle to make vulnerability in layers and layers. Reproductive justice does not include only abortion rights, but also population policy and others which will be discussed by Mala. So reproductive rights alone are not enough. So now we are looking at what does it mean when we talk of reproductive right? Where do we put a girl child, a child of sexual abuse, and child with an incestuous relationship? And what happens if you do not make these rights accessible to everybody? This is a grim picture from India. I bring this because a lens of forensic comes with me when I go. So I look at children, what happened to them in pandemics, what happened to them before pandemics. For a long time, we did not even actually accept that there was a child sexual abuse in India. All the rape laws that were applicable to the adults were also applicable to the child. Only till 2012, then this change was made where the POCSO was brought in. So prevention of child sexual offenses. It was defined in 2012. So above and beyond the sexual intercourse, the pornography and digital penetration and other things were discussed. So 10% of the girls might have experienced sexual violence when they are in 10 to 14-year age group. Up to 30% during 15 to 19 years. That means there is a steady increase. And overall, 42% of Indian girls have gone through the trauma of sexual violence before they reach the age of 20. So according to Carson, excluding children from 1 to 5 years, 1/5 of country's population might have faced some kind of sexual abuse, at least in life. So this is only a tip of the iceberg. But then can you imagine this interposed when during pandemics, what could have happened if they're exposed to sexual intercourse, if they are in teens, if they get pregnant and you have removed all the sexual abortion services or even contraception advice. With that is an added component during pandemic, with schools opting for online classes. 60% of online users were children. There was a new threat that was coming. During the use of online platform, children were without parental supervision because, as we knew, the caretakers were not working. So the lady has to look at even the caring part of it, the cooking part of it, the cleaning part of it, and everything. So when children were left unattended, they were vulnerable to online sexual abuse. So according to the National Crime Records Bureau and National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, US, at least 25,000 images of children, of child abuse were uploaded across social media. This is from India, between September 19 to Jan 2020. That means they did fall onto the predators on the net. So when we talk of sexual reproductive rights, sexual does not mean only girl. It also means the boys, the teenage boys, the teenage girls, everybody where they can be sexually exploited, where they require a care and support. So, and the mitigation from such a sexual exploitation. So the harsh reality for millions of children in India from all socioeconomic groups, early marriage to domestic violence, to sexual violence, violence at school and in home, trafficking, online violence, child labor, and bullying. All these forms of violence, abuse, and exploitation have lifelong consequences on child's lives. And more so because children promise secrecy. They are put in the fear of their dear ones being killed or hurt. So they would not speak about it for quite some time. There are other flaws in the social system where most medical professions aren't equipped with skills to examine sexual abuse in children. At one particular time, I was examining this 7-year-old girl who was repeatedly sexually abused. She left her one place of stay to come to another place. It took nearly 3 sittings for me to get some idea about sexual exploitation. It is not easy, and you cannot upfront ask them what happened to you. So it requires a great deal of determination and willingness to walk the extra mile. Sexual abuse of boys is still widely neglected, and many people refuse to believe that children, when they try to communicate the nature of crime being done against them, and especially if they're relatives, the mother say, no, you're only fibbing. If they're own brothers or somebody like, a mother's brother or mother's close relative, the first thing the mother says is, shut up, this didn't happen. So just imagine if a young girl getting pregnant, what would her future hold? What occupation would she be doing? And would childhood pregnancy automatically transfer into a child bride and a childhood marriage? Would that close the doors for her social development in future? Her cerebral development in future? Will she be able to achieve a full potential? And why only she is being punished for something that she herself alone is not responsible? So this is some facts and figures from Sub-Saharan Africa, where surveys of 2011 to 16 showed that more than half the rural aged 15 to 24-year age group have been pregnant before birthdays. So this is almost the similar case in many of the Asian countries. So Universal Progress Reviews for BRICS, talking about the sexual and reproductive health rights. Now they have come up with assessing states' human rights record. How do these countries fare? The BRIC countries are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So they say that the landless informal sector workers, migrants, blacks, indigenous people, minorities, and people with elderly and children, and those affected by conflicts, and especially women and LGBTQ, are all vulnerable. Now, having called them vulnerable, what's the next step? So we also have to make sure that these observations are common to BRIC countries. Trafficking of women and girls for sexual purpose is rampant. Maternal health mortality also has to be brought down. violence against cisgender girls and LGBTQIA is rampant. So India specific, if you look at, limited coverage of people with disability under surveillance. In fact, you'll be surprised to know or shocked to know that we have no special provision for disability and especially transgender sexual exploitation. As a result, many of them do not even access the police station to make a complaint. Limited capacity to provide services to gender-based violence and sexual reproductive health. So what we need is guaranteeing the right to health, obligate states to adopt national public health strategy. This includes plan of action that contains sexual and reproductive health and rights strategy. How are we going to do it? Like in a maternal health, sexuality education, contraception services, and access to voluntary family planning. There should be like a mentor, coach and a mentor, advise them about family planning techniques, but not make it like a national mission. If you have to make it a national mission, go ahead and make it for starving children, food for all. That would be more education for all. That is where you should be going and not at these levels. Reproductive rights are an example of critical importance of public health law in protecting our bodies and rights. Keeping abortion safe and legal protects health of pregnant people and preserves the human right to make personal, medical, and life choices. So when you cannot provide an abortion care, what happens? They incur social, financial, and physical costs. 3/4 of the abortion patients were poor and low income, and many of them are people of color. So majority of these people report their chief reason for ending pregnancy as inability to afford the cost of raising a child. This is not surprising given financial insecurity. So there is an increasing number of people in the United States, especially when you don't have an abortion. It's not your right. You speak of right to die. You know, I have completed my lifespan, euthanasia, I want to die. So as a male or a female, you have a right to die, but you do not have a right to go for an abortion. Isn't that ridiculous? Because ultimately it is you whose body it has to take. The COVID-19 pandemic amplified these costs through widespread underemployment. And that is the time where people had to go with pregnancies they didn't want to. Now they have a child, lifelong they have to support, even if they cannot afford to. So for realization of reproductive rights, we need to start with sex education, educating against domestic violence, HIV care and prevention. Domestic violence has become so much a talk of the town that everybody knows about it, but then everybody says we can't do anything about it. It has caused such great insensitivity in us that we would say, what can we do about it? But yes, there is a privilege of the cerebrally intellectual people that at least we can raise our voices. HIV care and prevention, family planning, abortion, contraception, especially when you cut down the services in pandemic, first thing you think of is abortion contraception services. But the reality is it's like a double jeopardy, double punishment for the lady. One to go through it and to lifelong to face this. So along with that, safe delivery, abortion, avoiding preterm labor or assisting in induction of labor. This didn't happen in pandemic. Ladies during labor pains were brought to the hospital and to be told, this is only COVID hospital, go to some other. Many of them delivered, many of them died on the way, but we also lack the transparent data because we want to look at it like a COVID success story. So any other deaths they cause a noise in the background. But then we're going to lose out on that data. So prevention and management of postpartum hemorrhage, cesarean section, and appropriate postpartum care. All this should be under the universal access to reproductive health. Unless we have an adolescent, especially educating the adolescents on contraception, prevalence rate, unmet needs of the family, and proportion of demand for contraception satisfied. If you have the contraception education, sex education to the children, which will be continued even in emergencies and beyond, that's a very healthy way to treat your adult. So the lessons learned, I'll be short because I think we have also been discussing about it, that when the pandemic took over, sexual reproductive rights were cut down. As a result, a lot of pregnancies went up. After 3 weeks or 4 weeks, they started. Abortion services resumed. But how would a person travel to that place? That access was still not there. So just having your clinic open doesn't necessarily mean people who came on the road were beaten up. So they didn't even venture outside. So individual right to plan a family, terminate pregnancy, contraceptives, learn about sex education, they were all withheld. Whereas according to Constitution of India, they are the rights that need to be given and it should not be curtailed. So right to equality, yet in COVID-19, minor girls became pregnant. Promise of physical, mental integrity was not there. And to have HIV, STIs that treated was not there. So overall, we have had 7 million unintended pregnancies and thousands of deaths from unsafe abortion. And also skyrocketing of gender-based violence in pandemics. And it literally was a second wave of pandemic. That's the gender-based violence, incestuous relationship, teenage pregnancies, abortion, and deaths due to this. So the Mary Stopes Index, one of the largest charities, talks about the closure of contraceptive services and says 9.5 million women and girls would lose access to contraception if you do that. 2.7 million unsafe abortion and 11,000 pregnancy-related deaths. So closing down of abortion services to millions of India and Nepal, that resulted in havoc. But we still don't have a systematic study how they coped, what mechanisms were in place, and who is bailing them out. So disruption already cost 26 million couples who could not access, and 2.3 million unintended pregnancies, and 800,000 unsafe abortion. So actually, when you repurpose all the care only for COVID-19, but somewhere the shortage of public transport, PPE kits, supply chain, all this resulted in abortions and those not being performed to the level that was expected. So global shortage of contraceptives and increased risk of STD. So what we need to look at is what we need to focus on, how human rights and gender impact need to be studied so that policies are well informed. Instead of we should get the data out and look at it in the true sense, then pushing it under the carpet to talk of only COVID success stories. Data from participation of groups that are neglected can be disaggregated on grounds of discrimination and again, human rights such as age, gender, socioeconomic status, etc. Focus on vulnerable group through ensuring continuity of care. We saw a lot of migrant workers, ladies with even 7-8 months pregnancy with a child in the hand, another child they were pulling through as a migrant workers cutting across. It really put humanity to re-look into, are we doing the right thing? And voices that can be heard, especially when the decision is made by somebody, but they're not the ones who are suffering. So support survivors of gender-based violence and mitigate impact on the crisis of women and girls, and protecting women and girls from domestic and other forms of gender-based violence. It is for real, it is there, because many a times, even when we have a POCSO child, when we want to remove them from family, the next question is, do we have an appropriate women and child welfare scheme to house them, educate them, and bring them up to their future? Or is it only a stopgap arrangement? So to conclude, in order to avoid pitfalls of ignoring sex and gender determination, we need to have a general sex gender sensitive approach. COVID-19 specific mortality has brought to light importance of incorporating sex specific variables, and to have communities and vulnerable groups represented in policy, and to cover reproductive rights under public health services, and do not keep it detached in case of emergency. They should not be curtailed. We need prioritization of reproductive rights and bringing reproductive rights under the public health law, stringent measures to keep them going, and developing sensitivity to reproductive rights. And every common man should be educated about the domestic violence and what role we can play. And for that, we need to have structures in place. So in the end, you cannot have one rule only for COVID-19 or any pandemic, because then the people on which it applies are not uniform. They are not like soldiers in the chessboard that they move in only one direction. You could cause a disaster, a second pandemic, if you do not take care of the people who are going to be using your rule are differently abled and differently challenged and endowed. There is a diversity in that group. So that is where we need to look at. So thank you very much. I'm sorry if I've exceeded my time.
Thank you so much, Professor Vaswani, for such an enriching session and taking out time and giving us valuable information. Now, I would like our chair, Professor Vibhuti Patel, to give us a comment on what Professor Vaswani did. Ma'am.
Professor Vaswani, I congratulate you for encapsulating wide range of issues concerning reproductive health, bodily integrity of women, dignity of women, and also the state policies. I think I would like also you to comment on two-child norm. I think that is one aspect which you have missed.
Yeah.
Which several state governments have imposed, because now population policy is a state subject.
Yeah. Actually, madam, I don't believe in forcing people to have one child, two child. We should take a lesson from China. What happened in China with one child policy is such a disaster that if you can imagine the population of Belgium, double that number are children in China who are not existing. They're not existing because they don't have documents. If they were to get documents, their parents would be penalized. So there are many, many children who are literally landless, and they are called the black children of China. So if you do such a coercive law, then this is where we need to look at China, what happened. So do we want to go that direction? Or would we like to tell if you would like to give endorsement for only two-child policies, okay, you have something that you'd like to encourage them through a way of the second child, you're going to give these. The third child may not get that much of benefit. But you cannot deprive, of course, because it's a human right and you cannot make that distinction. But somewhere, as it is, the fertility rate is going down world over. And I think we need to take into consideration that making reproductive, especially two-child norms, may be against the culture of the country as well. Because if the people want to have 2, 3, 4 children, you can only say that, okay, you cannot have more than 4 in a way that is like a mentor to a coach. But you cannot force a reproductive choice on them. I mean, to my knowledge, that's how it is. Because even today, when you look at the children from China, they cannot leave their own place where they're wending to go out. If they're caught by police, they go into jail. And they can face any punishment for that matter, because they are children, they don't have a documentation. So that is how we need to look at, if it can happen to them, what is the lessons we have learned? So I don't believe in that, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Vibhuti, Patel, Dr. Vibhuti, can I add something very on this? You asked about the two-child family norm, and Dr. Vaswani has so nicely pointed out the impact on China and its consequences. In spite of talking two-child family norm, because we did not, past emergency, we did not impose it so rigidly, and we are trying to do that now. What India's demographic dividend that we call today is actually an advantage of not imposing it so rigidly, meaning we have a population that is, whose median age is in the 30s, meaning we have a working population which is large, which will be therefore able to manage India's economic strategies for the future. Because when you talk in economics, no, it is not all only capital. We also need labor. And that labor is produced is this huge population mass that we have in the working ages. And given the decline, increasing expectation of life at birth, this population only is going to support the aged population. So India's economic strength is going to come from this population and from not having in the past learning lessons from emergency, not imposing the two-child family norm, and the reproductive rights for which people like Dr. Vibhuti, Patel and hosts of women throughout the 80s and 90s fought the government against the two-child family norm, resulting in its abandonment in 96, 97, post ICPD, it was abandoned. But you are now seeing it coming back through very, I don't know what to call it, for want of a better word, backdoor entry. After fighting, it's like we are reinventing the wheel. You will, if Dr. Patel will comment on it, there was a strong reproductive rights movement against the two-child family norm in the 80s and 90s. That is why it went away. Dr. Patel, I leave the ball in your court.
Just one line, can I say? Yeah,
I think those who don't learn from the history, they repeat the mistakes of history. So yes. I think we must keep this in mind. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Ma'am, just one remark.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. This is regarding work. In continuing with what Dr. Mala said, I totally agree with her, because I have a friend from China who's now abroad. She's looking after 8 of her grandparents, because her parents, her mother and father are the only children. So her father's side, she has father, mother's side, mother, and their grandparents. So there is 8 old people in the house, but she's the only one who can look after now, who's working. So it has caused a lot of problem for a lot of families, economically as well as mentally also, ma'am. Right, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I would like to ask Professor Veena Vaswani to give us way forward. Ma'am.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Can
ma'am.
you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
So I would think that 2 levels, or maybe at multiple levels, we need to work. One is us being aware and having everybody within our services, in our fold, because it's always good for us to start what we can change ourselves. So in that, more of sensitization, more of being sensitive to the needs of others when we look at, and even at the colleagues level to sensitize them. But what requires at the national level is having these rights that should not be cut down during the emergencies or during the pandemics. So this should come under the public health, and they should continue to have services, and there should be structures made now and not in case of emergencies. So if you don't have a preparation now, then it's like disasters. Only you start digging a well when the disaster occurs, because there's a fire and you need water for that. So it won't be effective, but that's what needs to be planned according to me. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Vaswani, for giving us valuable information. Now I would like to invite our second expert for today's session, Advocate Dr. Shalu Nigam. Dr. Nigam is advocate, author, and researcher, gender and human rights. Ma'am's topic is conjugality, sexuality, and women's rights in India. Very warm welcome to you, ma'am, and over to you, ma'am.
Hello. First of all, I would like to thanks to the IMPRI for organizing this wonderful workshop. It's been a great learning experience, and of course, interacting with the so many experts. You keep on learning. So it's been very enriching for me. Just a moment, I'll just share my presentation.
Yes, we can see it, ma'am. You can go full screen.
Yeah. I don't know why it is. Yeah, so today I will be talking about live-in relationships and legal safeguards for women. As we have been reading, for past few days, a lot of these things are coming in the news, and we're wondering, what is happening around, that why, so much of violence which is being committed on women. So I will divide my presentation into 2 parts. One is about violence against women in homes, and second part will be about live-in relationship and the law. So violence against women, we all know, and even the UN chief a few days back, he said that every 11 minutes, a woman or a girl is killed by an intimate partner or a family member. And then there is a gender snapshot 2022, which says that 1 in every 10 women and girls in the age group of 15 to 49 years, was exposed to sexual or physical violence by an intimate partner in a previous year. So this discrimination and abuse comes at steep cost. It limits women's participation in all walks of life, denied them their basic rights and freedom. So, but the thing is that neither live-in relationship nor violence against women is new. They have been existed for ages, throughout decades, but right now the severity and magnitude of violence is increasing. The legal system, though, provide a platform for the women to raise their concerns, and theoretically has evolved some rights over the years, but in actual practice, it it has failed to curb the crime against women, perhaps because the implementation part is very weak. So in the media, they are discussing about few particular cases, but even in the history, if we go back, there is in 1991, a similar kind of case was reported where a woman was buried alive in a backyard of her house in Bangalore, and the prime suspect was her second husband. After 3 years of sting operation, he admitted to having killed his wife to gain possession of her wealth, and then he led the police to remain, the buried parts in their residence in 1994, and right now he is serving life in prison. Then another is Tandoor murder case. We all are very familiar with that case. Naina Sahani was murdered by Sushil Sharma in their home in Delhi on 2nd July 95 over suspicion of her having an extramarital affair. So Sharma shot her and then chopped off her body into pieces and stuffed it in a tandoor in a restaurant managed by his friend. So he was sentenced to death, and this was later commuted to life term. And he walked out of jail in December 2018 after the Delhi High Court ordered his release. In Dehradun, another man murdered his wife and chopped her body into 70 pieces and froze them before dumping them for several days. And he is also serving life sentence. But only, as we are seeing, that only few cases are being highlighted by the media. But the violence is happening every day, in our houses. So I would like to say that toxic communal narrative is being used by the media and some political groups to defend arranged marriages while blaming live-in relationships for such crimes. Now, these narratives ignore the data that the highest number of crimes are recorded under Section 498A that deals with cruelty by husband and relatives of a woman, and women face violence, due to dowry or due to other, reasons. So women are being harassed, tortured, and murdered in their marital homes. And these are not only happening in conventional arranged marriages where women are listening to their parents, but these are also happening in relationship by choice. So in a live-in relationship, women are taking risk of choosing companionship, but they're denied support by the family. In marriage, of course, women may get support from their natal family, but the thing is that they are forced to being adjusted in a violent marriage. So, but my issue is that when we are talking about violence in marriage, we are not questioning the hierarchy and inequality which exist in marriage. So I just want to flag this issue that we need to rethink about the nature of marriages, the cost and the problems involved. We have to recognize the extreme vulnerability of those who choose their own partners, and also of those who are forced into marriage with strangers. So, but why many people are asking that why can't women leave the violent situation? Now, from our experience of working with women as lawyer and a researcher, we know that marital relationship doesn't mean that a man-woman tie, which is merely for exchange of intimacy in lieu of bread or protection. Patriarchal conditioning and socialization of women since her birth, where frequently a woman is raised with the hope that her salvation lies in her marriage. So when a woman who grew up in such environment, when she faced violence, she felt shocked, betrayed, guilty, and fearful, and want that violence should stop somehow. As a survivor, a woman who may face violence may remain silent, and we have seen cases where women have remained silent for years. She may justify it, as the National Family Health Survey data shows that many women also say that it's right for a husband to beat a woman if woman is is being disobedient. So her response is determined by various factors, which may be cultural specific, social, economic, and is based on availability of resources and support mechanisms, besides her own notion of notion and sense of justice. Also, this compulsion ranges from fear to attract more violence, fear of retaliation, lack of housing and finances. It may be because of children, because of stigma, lack of courage or abilities, or lack of resources. So in a male-dominated society, violence remains invisible under the garb of discipline, and the realm of emotion may prevent a woman to walk out of a violent situation. But the important question which need to be asked, and less emphasis is placed as to why men choose to abuse women when violence is legally prohibited. Is it the culture of violence with impunity, or is it toxic masculinity, or both? That we have to understand. Maybe in a male-dominated society, violence is sanctioned and legitimized by the norms, which are patriarchal norms. So a batterer does not exist in vacuum. Rather, his actions are legitimized by the hierarchical order that normalize and trivialize violence while enabling him to act violently. And this uneven social order also devalues a woman and makes her vulnerable. So inequality exists to erode female dignity while inflating a man's sense of entitlement. Now we have seen media and courts, in some cases, portray batterers as innocent, object of pity, or that they are gentle and they are driven to commit violence because of tensions or because of victims' provocative actions, or his obsession with alcohol, or because of nagging behavior of wife, or because she failed to discharge her duties, or she's disloyal or lack characters. So why so much of pity with violent men? That we need to see. But in all cases, from our experience, we know that abuser is a powerful person in comparison to the victim. He is better equipped in terms of skills and abilities to articulate the situation to his advantage. In many cases, batterers lie or deceit to demoralize complainants. They control the resources and are positioned to hire a battery of lawyers to represent themselves in the court. So despite all the promises of progress which are being made, we know how sexism persists within the society, within the courts, within the families. And the idea of women being independent, strong, and with opinions and desires is still considered as an anathema in many societies. So women are continuously being caught in cruelty of daily violence. They face fear. The humanity is being diminished, and this is happening in a place called home, which is meant to provide the purpose of the home is to provide safety and comfort, and the abuser, who are deemed as protectors and providers, they are the basic the persons who are being abusing. So in patriarchal societies, women have no options which could lend support. And we all know that natal families hardly support daughters. So even when women want to go back to their families in extreme cases, that support is missing. So in live-in relationship, that belief that the person has committed wrong, which really prevent many natal families to support women. And then also there is a notion of honor which is being evoked. So the societies have not shed violence. Therefore, rather violence is becoming much more severe and harsher. So women are being murdered, burned alive, lynched, gang raped in public and private spaces. What is happening is that intersectionality of caste, religion, and other variables are also coming into play. So the society and the state, they both are tactically sanctioning and supporting the violence instead of taking action against it. So patriarchy is deeply entrenched. So women are approaching the legal system as agents of change, and with the hope that they will no longer be abused. But on the other side, violent men, the courts, the patriarchal society, they act as the upkeeper and preservers of patriarchy. And they're not willing to come out of their traditional age-old patriarchal mindset. So what is happening is that when women are coming in the courtrooms, the clash of ideology which is taking place. So a difference exists between the way women on grounds are dealing with realities of abuse, the way the law exists on paper, and the top-down approach taken by the courts. while implementing the law. So an insecurity prevails in the male-controlled society that is fearful of women who are demanding violence-free homes, and when women see marriage as partnership and expect men to be companions and not the masters of the lords. So with this, I'll talk about live-in relationships and how the courts have interpreted the law. So live-in relationships are relationships where two adults above the age of 18 cohabit without marrying each other. It has no legal implications. So live-in relationship in this situation, marriages are not registered, and to end this, formal divorce is not required. The courts, while pronouncing decision on such kind of relationships, compared them to marriages to determine whether this relationship has a characteristic or they are in the nature of marriage. In some cases, the courts have compared these relationships with that of Radha and the Lord Krishna in the mythological text to justify live-in relationships. In some cases, the courts have upheld certain rights of partners in the live-in relationship and rights of female partners to file domestic violence cases, right to maintenance, rights of the children who born out of such relationship, and so on. But the thing is that even though live-in relationships are legally accepted, but it is still considered as a taboo in India. In India, legitimacy is accorded to heterosexual marriages. Otherwise, all sorts of relationships are deemed to be illegitimate. In absence of any specific legislation or rules, Supreme Court in various cases have issued guidelines and to regulate such kind of relationships. So in the West, you have the concept of prenup agreements. In America, in several places in Europe, you have these agreements which act as a kind of contract. And in Canada, live-in relationships are recognized under the common law marriages. And this tie get the legal sanctity if the couple have been living in a relationship for 12 continuous months. But in India, the legality of the live-in relationship stemmed from Article 19A of the Constitution, which talks about right to freedom of speech and expression, and Article 21, which talks about protection of right to life and personal liberty. So right to life emphasizes on the freedom of an individual to enjoy life, and individual has a right to live with a person of their own interest, with or without marriage. So these cases were coming during the colonial rule also, and in several cases the courts then have given some interesting judgments, and they have said that when the parties are living for a long time, it will be held that marriage is in the nature of marriage. But the thing is that the courts as well as the society, they have been using such terms like concubines and keeps, and so it's all devalue women, but for men in live-in relationship, no such terms are used. So in 1978, Supreme Court in one of the case, it says that if a man and a woman are living as husband and wife for a long time, it will be presumed that it is a kind of legitimate kind of relationship. In 2001, the Allahabad High Court in one case says that because she is a major adult and she has the right to go anywhere and live with anyone, in our opinion, a man and a woman, even without getting married, can live together if they wish. This may be considered as immoral by the society, but it is not illegal. The Domestic Violence Act, which was enacted in 2005, it is for the first time while in this act the legislature has acknowledged the live-in relationship by giving right and protection to those females who are not legally married but are living with a male in a relationship. And Section 2F of the Domestic Violence Act defined domestic relationship means a relationship between two people who live in a shared household. And though live-in relationship is not categorically defined, but it is left for the court to interpret it. And the courts have used the expression relationship in the marriage to presume that live-in relationships are covered under the ambit of this expression. And so at least some safety is being given by the law to the women. So in 2006, in one of the case, Supreme Court ruled that two persons of opposite sex living together are not doing anything illegal. In 2010, the court held that relationship that continued for a long time cannot be termed as walk-in or walk-out kind of relationship. So it is presumed that relationship is in nature of marriage. In another case, the court defined that a live-in relationship between two consenting adults of heterogenic sex does not amount to an offense, even though it may be perceived as immoral. Again, in 2013, the court ruled that women partner in a live-in relationship is protected under the Domestic Violence Act. And in 2015, the court decided that couple living in relationship may be presumed as legally married. So in one of the judgment in 2010, the Supreme Court laid down the criteria for live-in relationship to be legal. It says that couple must hold themselves out to society as being akin to living in marriage. They must be of legal age to marry. They must be otherwise qualified to enter into legal marriage. Like one of the qualifications is that the parties should be unmarried. They should voluntarily cohabit for a significant period of time. And therefore, certain live-in relationships where two married person or one married and another unmarried person are staying together, it does not have a legal basis. So what are the criteria which determines that the relationship is the nature of marriage? Is duration of relationship, how the parties socialize in public, the age of parties, there must be kind of emotional and intimate kind of relationship, the financial arrangement, the domestic arrangement, the intention and the conduct of the parties, and children. Having children is a strong indication that nature of relationship is similar to that of marriage, and participants have a long-term view of relationship. So these are the guidelines in various cases which the courts have given. And now what are the rights of partners? Initially, we know that section 125 of Criminal Procedure Code, it allowed a married woman who is unable to pay for herself to claim alimony from her husband. But the Malimat Committee report, it has extended this definition of wife to include a woman who has lived with a man like his wife for a considerable period of time, and therefore she is eligible to claim maintenance. So courts in various cases have said that a woman can claim maintenance under section 125 CRPC, even if she is living in the live-in relationship. Then in 2013, the court says that this kind of relationship will fall under the domestic relationship, and women are eligible for alimony. And in another case in 2018, the court said that woman has right to reside in a shared household, and woman is eligible to inherit the property after the death of her partner. Then women also have right to invoke section 498A, that is cruelty against married women within her matrimonial home. So initially in 2007, the court says that there must be a valid marriage relationship between the accused and the victim. Otherwise, penal provision of section 498A will not be attracted. But in 2009, the court protected a woman who was living in a live-in relationship from harassment for dowry, and the court says that there should be no impediment in laws to protect such parties. But in the Kerala High Court in 2018, it says that for an offense under section 498A to be committed, the parties must have undergone some sorts of ceremonies with the object of getting married. So there's a whole lot of confusion which is prevailing about the rights of children who are born out of live-in relationship. In various cases, in 94, in 2008, and recently in 2022, the courts have ruled that children born to the partners in live-in relationship can be considered as legitimate. But the condition is that a relationship should be of long-term and should not be kind of walk-in and walk-out kind of nature. So long course of living together is presumed as a kind of relationship where children are given right to legitimacy. Then the courts have also ruled that such children are eligible for the part of family succession. So one of the interesting case which came before Delhi High Court in 2015, where a petitioner was an Uzbekistan national. She is in a live-in relationship with a person from India, and they had a son out of that relationship, and she sought the extension of a visa to stay in India. The government pleaded that we are not granting extension to visa to people in live-in relationship, but only in case of marriages we are granting visa. But the court extended the benefit of Domestic Violence Act to the women who are in live-in relationship, and they say that extension should be granted to foreigner people who are into marriage or into live-in relationships. So we know well very famous judgment, Puttaswamy versus Union of India, where the court says that it should be the discretion of the individual as to how they want to lead their lives, and the state is only required to guarantee protection to individuals' autonomy rather than imposing restriction. So privacy is also incorporated in the right to live under Article 21 of the Constitution. But what is happening is that a bench of Rajasthan State Human Rights Commission in September 2019, they demanded the law against live-in relationship and call it as a violative. Then the courts in other cases have ruled that live-in relationships are not legitimate. So there is a whole lot of confusion which is prevailing. Into 2021, the Allahabad High Court has even imposed the cost of ₹5,000 on the petitioner, saying that bench is not against live-in relationship, but it is against illegal relations. So now the distinction is made between live-in relationship and illegal relations. So as per this interpretation of the court, women must remain within the boundaries of marriage in order to access courts for securing protection from violence. So the courts are taking the monolithic view of marriage, and they still prefer the restricted heteronormative understanding of marriage as an institution. So what is required is that in legal terms, we need a reform which should, the law should take cognizance of the fact that women are in vulnerable position in marriage or in live-in relationships. And for such live-in relationships, there must be a clear-cut law. We could have a prenup agreements or contracts which could clearly lay down the rights and obligation of the parties in terms of property rights, in terms of right of the children who are born, and so on. It should be clearly laid down, the procedures as to how, if the violence is happening, how should the protection should be granted. And even in case of honor killing, we need a law to protect the couples who marry intercaste or or interreligion or different kind of marriages. We also need strong implementation of domestic violence law. In terms of criminal law, we need to fix the accountability of the abuser, and we need certainty of punishment. In terms of civil remedies, we need proper and timely implementation of the rights which are mentioned under the Domestic Violence Act. We need to constantly monitor how the courts are giving judgments. We need continuous training and gender sensitization programs for the court staff, for the protection officers, and other people who are associated with the enforcement of the law. Then in terms of infrastructure and social security provision for women, we need shelter homes, we need short stay homes, medical facilities. All this is mentioned under the Domestic Violence Act, but again, it's not being implemented. So, and we also need social security provision for women and children. We need to address the inequalities which exist within the families and within the society. So the need is to smash patriarchy. And with this, I'll come to end of this presentation. Tarabai Shinde, she wrote Sri Purush Tulna, and this was written in response to the death sentence which was given to young widow Vijay Lakshmi for aborting her infant in 1882. So more than 120 years back, she asked several questions about equality between men and women in the society, and these questions still persist, and we need to answer all of them. So with this, I really end this presentation. So thank you so much for giving this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Nigam, for such a valuable information. I would like to invite Professor Patel to comment on what Dr. Nigam said.
Thank you, Advocate Shalu Nigam, for very brilliantly exposing the issue of live-in relationship, which is a buzzword. Wherever you go in the university or colleges or community, people are debating it, especially after the recent tragedies. And you have also brought in that whole, it is not that one particular community or man from one particular religious group do that. It is there are, everywhere it's happening. Only thing is the media, what is valorized and what is kept into at the back burner. No, so yeah. But my major question to you is about, you have also suggested recommendations, and you have also suggested what all the state as well as the community needs to do. But what would be your advice to young couples, especially the law is not implemented, parents are rejecting live-in relationship. What kind of support system they need to create, number one, and number two, why gender responsive budgeting for dealing with the domestic violence is still so inadequate? And even if it is there, Nirbhaya Fund 1,000 crore we have, but still it is not used by states. No, there hardly any use of this.
Yeah, I truly agree with you. First thing about what people can do, like what couples can do, young people. The first thing which I could really think of is creating self-awareness. Thinking about before forming a relationship. Now people say, okay, love is blind, but I really don't believe into that kind of thing. Maybe we have to understand the person beforehand. What kind of the person is like, what kind of compatibility. Now in India, what kind of marriages we are talking about, astrological compatibility and all kind of other things, which I say I think which are really not required, but we have to understand the compatibility between the two people. And the women should be very particular. They should discuss about all this issue with their partners, about finances, about different kinds of their opinions and thoughts, and the kind of children are born, what kind of religion they would follow, what kind of their rights and responsibilities. Everything should be discussed before having that kind of relationship. We also should build a kind of solidarity groups and networks with like-minded people. And we have seen in many cases that women generally, when they face violence, they're isolated. But that isolation, that whole spiral has to be broken up, and we need to have, and the parents should be supportive. I know that parents are not supportive, but then if parents are not supportive, then we have to really have a kind of network of friends, or other kinds of maybe women's NGOs, or some kind of a platform where we can bring people together. The other thing is about the education in the colleges and the schools. We have to think about curriculum more from kind of awareness perspective about sex education, about legal rights, about different kinds of rights people have. And as even during the earlier presentation, it has been discussed that we need to talk to adolescents and children in schools and colleges. So that could be one thing. About the gender responsive budgeting, of course, Nirbhaya Fund is, we know that it is not being used. Much of the fund has gone into advertisements, or even I was reading that police was given protection. The vehicle which was purchased from Nirbhaya funds for women, now that was given to police.
For MLAs in Maharashtra, 23 vehicles were purchased for the MLAs from Nirbhaya fund.
Yeah, yeah. So this is how we are. The funds are limited, and then we are putting the funds in some other direction. So that we have to really see that how can we really make that kind of change so that budgets are being budgets are limited and more budgets are now being diverted. So we have to really demand that budget should be used for creating shelter homes, short stay homes, and all those kind of things, and even for continuous trainings and even the courts, the judges, the lawyers, the protection officers in Delhi, as we have very few protection officers, 18 for so much of population. So that things I think we need to really consider.
I think when 200 years back, when Bapnu Ghar was established in Mumbai, there was a big uproar against it that now Gujarati women will start running away. And the same thing happened when I was talking about gender responsive budgeting to Gujarat Government Gender Resource Center. The principal secretary of the government, he says that if this will break the family, if we start implementing DV Act, the family institution of family will get jeopardized. So if this is the mindset of people in power, even when you have money parked in the ministry, what can be done? So
yeah, that is what we have to be continuously aware of and take some action against it. So I think we at the women's movement, with several of the organizations, we could come together and look into that, because NCW and women's commissions, state women's commissions, what kind of work they're doing. So I think we have to really
continuously. There are two questions from Dr. Khevna Desai. Can you unmute yourself and ask them? Dr. Khevna Desai.
Yes, now I can. Actually, the system did not allow me to. The first question is, what about adoption rights of live-in partners? Do they have right to adopt? And second is heterosexuality a necessity for long-term live-in relationship for basic conjugal rights? Because you talked about the duration being very important for live-in relationship should have to get a better legal status. But is heterosexuality a requirement apart from the consenting age, etc.?
Yeah, see, legally, as per the constitutional rights, we have discussed about this Puttaswamy judgment. Now, but the Puttaswamy judgment says that every individual has a right, but then the interpretation of the courts differed when it comes to the lower courts, to the high courts, and to various other courts. The courts have interpreted the rights differently. So that is what the problem is. So we need to have a kind of a law which could clearly say that, okay, if people are in such kind of relationship, they will be protected and their rights will be protected. But what is happening is that right now we don't have the law, and therefore this whole confusion is persisting. So as you say that, of course, people in different kind of relationships, LGBT and all those people should be given protection. Every citizen is entitled to protection according to the law. But how it is implemented, that is again whole area of problem. So when you talk about adoptions, surely people have right to adopt. But again, how the agencies, because when people really go to these agencies really have their own bureaucratic or technical, kind of readings, which really need to be questioned. So even in the passport cases, we have seen how single mothers have to really struggle to get the passport. So even when the rights exist on paper, they are not being implemented, by the courts or by the government's bureaucratic departments. So that is, I think, again, we need to sensitize them. We need to have continuous training programs. So that is, I think, we need to, invest our resources in. This is what I feel.
Dr. Dolly Mishra has raised hand. Can you unmute yourself and ask questions? Dr. Dolly Mishra.
Dolly ji, you can unmute.
Can we move ahead? Ms. Fiza?
Yes, ma'am. So there's one question which is addressed to Dr. Veena, and the question is from Anjali Navalji. Can you please elaborate on different state policies on family planning that incentivize pubectomy? Do we have such similar policies for male vasectomy? Why are men not encouraged, like women, to undergo such measures?
I think that Dr. Mala Ramanathan is the next speaker. She can take up that question because it was in the previous session, not current session. Yes.
Veena ma'am, if you want to, ma'am was unmuting. Veena ma'am, if you want to answer, please go ahead.
Yeah.
Should we take it after Mala? If she covers it, fine. Otherwise, we'll take that later. That's also fine because I have a couple of states which incentivize and I can talk about it later.
Yeah.
Okay. So way forward and final remarks from Shaluji. Shalu ma'am.
I think she gave it.
Yeah, I have already said that
Very exhaustive
again,
stuff.
we need a law, a specific law maybe to protect such kind of relationship, which could clearly lay down the rights and even the rights of adoption and rights of LGBT, and all kind of different kind of relationships which are emerging because of various technological changes and social changes. So we need laws and also more spending, more resources to be invested on training and gender sensitization from colleges and schools to even to the courts. So maybe that could be one thing which I could really say.
Thank you, Dr. Nigam, for answering the question. Now I would like to invite our third expert for today's session, Professor Mala Ramanathan. Professor Ramanathan is professor at Achyuta Menon Center for Health Science Studies, SCTI MST, Tiruvandanapuram, working editor at Indian Journal of Medical Ethics, IJME. Ma'am's topic is the law and gender access to abortion services for married women in India. Very warm welcome to you, ma'am, and over to you.
Is my screen visible?
Yeah.
For some reason.
No, it's working now.
We are able
Sorry.
to.
Yes.
Good evening. I think it's more or less time to say good evening. And I would like to thank Professor Patel and my colleagues on the panel because they have covered a lot of the area that makes the very specificity of my topic a bit more lucid, because Dr. Veena Vaswani has addressed a broad spectrum of the consequences of lack of reproductive choices for women and the developmental divide that exists between men and women in our society as a result of these consequences. Now, Dr. Nigam has actually addressed a lot of the specifics of the law, which I hope helps you to contextualize the legal situation in which women exercise their rights. So what I am taking now is a very narrow focus of the changes in the law that have been implemented recently, and then giving you some evidence about what is the context in which the law has been amended in the context of abortion services. And, though I haven't put it there, I will also address the global context in which this has happened in India. So I'm very grateful to my colleagues, and I'm grateful to IMPRI for Gender Impact Studies Center for giving me this opportunity, because this thing that happened in the end of September in the legal frame is something that is very, very important, especially in view of the global context in which this law was enacted in India or law amendment happened in India, when actually the right to abortion enshrined under Roe versus Wade legislation, which was 50 years old, was being reversed in the United States. So, it is in that context that this law change happened. So what I'm going to be talking about is, I will talk about the changes that were brought about in the MTP Act on 29th September. That was this enactment, the law, it was passed, but it came bang on September 28th, International World Abortion Day, that this case was being heard in the Supreme Court. I will explain why these changes were brought about by the Supreme Court of India, and I have many legal luminaries here who might correct me, if I don't get the legal words right, because I'm not a lawyer. And I will explain what is the evidence regarding the gender context in which these choices are made, that made the Supreme Court said, this law has to change or we have to make amendments. And I will suggest, you ask way forward, what we need to do as sexual and reproductive rights advocates. We don't have to be lawyers to be advocates, right? To ensure that women, and this is specific to people who identify as women, to realize their rights clarified by the Supreme Court of India in September 2022. The Supreme Court of India, and this recent ruling was in response to appellate jurisdiction appeal arising of an SLP called X versus the Principal Secretary, Health and Family Welfare Department, Government of National Capital Territory of Delhi, and others. So I've given you the act there. Now, what was this? Why did the Supreme Court feel the need for coming out with this ruling? It explains it in that 75-page document extensively. Now, see, any rule or law is usually made by the legislature. But the court was hearing appeals on an ongoing basis for interventions by women who were coming to it, knocking on its door, because the technology to find out certain things which could be problematic for them, was progressing, and the existing law was a constraint, meaning you could find out if the, using certain amniocentesis, etc., in the second trimester, that whether there's going to be experience of a problem with the fetus that you're having, or, sometimes women found out they were pregnant very late, and therefore, if they felt continuing the pregnancy is a threat to their physical health as vouched for by doctors, it was a bit too late. They, in their effort to knock various doors, it was crossing the 20 weeks that was allowed. So that extension happened. But even then, there was a lot of arbitrariness in the interpretation of the act, and different, as Dr. Nigam has so much pointed out, there is so much mismatch between one law and the other. And therefore, the court, after ruling in the case of a woman's appeal for abortion after 20th week, kept in abeyance certain things when in September it came out with a comprehensive pronouncement pending legislation. If now the government of India, our MPs and MLAs go there and make a law in this context, then we don't have to take this. But pending that law, the Supreme Court's pronouncement is the law. Why did it feel to need to talk about all this? Because there is, while we had the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act enacted in 71, we did not have even now a sufficient infrastructure to provide safe and legal abortions. This could be due to lack of awareness in the community. There is a lot of social stigma surrounding abortions. And actually, for a lot of women, there is the inability or lack of confidentiality of care, particularly in context in their own neighborhood. Then comes the registered medical practitioners, RMPs, fear because of what will happen in the society in which they are living. which resulted in them asking for extra-legal conditions. They asked for conditions which was not at all in the act of MTP. MTP Act did not say the adult woman needed consent from parents, fathers, husbands, anybody. But RMPs were doing it. If the woman was underage, then it was asking for judicial authorization when only guardian's consent was required for minors or mentally ill persons. But RMPs were asking for things which were not even required in the law because they were acting as agents of society, not people who were upholding the law. And in that process, they were actually denying women their reproductive autonomy. And this was for married women. Unmarried women, there was a lot of social stigma leading them to actually take recourse to inappropriate and substandard care for abortion. Now, this was the context. So it also said that, therefore, there is a purposive interpretation of the law with regard to unmarried women. And, the institution of marriage alone cannot confer rights to individual citizens of the country. If there is a right to abortion, it cannot, or, access to abortion, let's not call it right to abortion. Access to abortion cannot be, incumbent upon marriage as, enabling that access. And there are newer forms of familial relationships, such as the kind of relationships spoken about by now, that women are living in various forms of marital relationships. And therefore, ability to access abortion has to be equal for married and unmarried women and cannot be the privilege of only married women. So it looked into why the MTP Act came into existence, and it added an interpretation of injury to mental health. The Supreme Court of India also, for MTP Act and rules, interpreted the meaning of rape only insofar as MTP is concerned by including marital rape within the ambit of the women's access to abortion. That is a nice door that has opened, which, I am hoping that people will take recourse to in future. But that is another story, not falling within the ambit of this discussion. And to avail benefit of this Rule 32B, women, were asked to go and prove assault, rape, incest, and all that. And the RMPs would ask for FIR for allegation of rape in order to actually take recourse to MTP Act. All of this context were also taken cognizance of by the Supreme Court. It also looked at the, our colleagues, especially Veena Vaswani, Madam has talked about how the reading of POSCO Act and the MTP Act provide the MTP can be provided even under POSCO Act. The RMP can provide MTP on request of the minor and guardian and need not disclose the identity and other personal details of the minor in the information provided under Section 19(1) of the POSCO Act. The RMP is also exempt from disclosing the minor's identity in criminal proceedings, which may follow from the RMP's report. So what is it about that MTP Act which we need to take cognizance of? This is enacted. See, in India, we don't have a right to abortion. In 1971, our legislators passed this act as a mechanism because they were seized with the high levels of maternal mortality that were a consequence of illegal abortion. So they saw it as a measure to save the lives of pregnant women. And when abortion was criminalized, for saving the lives of pregnant women, this was an exception. It lays down who can perform abortion, when can you perform an abortion, under what conditions can you provide abortion, and where can you access safe and legal abortion as an exception to the criminalization of abortion in the country. So it is accessible on the opinion of the registered medical practitioner undertaken in good faith. Therefore, it is incumbent upon the decision of the registered medical practitioner. And it is not an expression of right to abortion. So the Supreme Court, what did it change? Earlier, option of abortion was not extended beyond 20 weeks for unmarried women. It extended it for unmarried women, extended the option of abortion up to 24 weeks for married women on account of rape, which was not available on September 29, 2022. It did this and relieved RMPs from mandatory reporting of name and identity of minors while providing MTP for minors. And this request for withholding has to come from the minor and the guardian of the minor. It did this by interpreting the existing laws and harmonizing them across equals, meaning it said that marriage doesn't therefore confer any additional privileges upon bodies that get pregnant. That is what it said. Therefore, if you make a distinction in access to MTP between married women and unmarried women, that exclusion is arbitrary, and therefore it harmonized that particular thing. So what is it with the context that the women's autonomy that Supreme Court was so concerned? It wanted to ensure reproductive autonomy to women regardless of marital status. There is evidence to indicate married women's choices with regard to reproduction are restricted because of familial circumstances, because partners disagree. And also health systems, because our RMPs require women to produce legally absolutely unnecessary documentation when requiring abortion. And therefore, the societal context makes the exercise of choice for married women all the more difficult. Forget about unmarried women at all. So what I'm going to now do is examine the access to abortions using the National Family Health Survey data to give you that Supreme Court said it on the basis of some cases coming before it. But the data, what does it tell us? The sample sizes. I'm taking the socio-economic context by looking at, my outcome is looking at pregnancy wastage, including abortions, and looking at male attitudes, the gendered context of women's lives, looking at, contraceptive use, what is male attitude, and therefore I'm looking at state level data. I am not looking at individual level data. And when I describe restrictions to access to abortion, I look at, again, state to look at the state level environment in which women are utilizing abortion. So this is not like a woman level data. It is using data on 28 states and about 8 to 10 union territories. So it was conducted in 28 states and 8 union territories, covering a host of, covering about 707 districts across India. It's a huge number, more than 6 lakh households. Women's reproductive history was collected from all eligible women and included 7 lakh eligible women in the reproductive ages. So this is not determined by marital status. It was collected very recently between 2019 and 21. So it's very recent data that I'm giving you to show you that what the Supreme Court said is real. I used last pregnancy, whose last pregnancy in the 5 years ended in an abortion. And the proportion of women among them who reported that why did they want abortion? Because their pregnancy was not planned, but yet they got pregnant. Percentage of men aged 15 to 49 who said contraception is women's business and a man should not have to worry about it. I've used this variable to demonstrate the gendered context of women's life. They have partners who do not allow them or do not give them families, households, which, patriarchal norms which govern the lives of women. Therefore, women's reproductive choices are not very easily exercised. And then we have the proportion of currently married women who said that they don't want to have any more children, but are unable to use any method to prevent getting pregnant. And there are women who said, we don't want to have The first group is when I say spacing, it is I don't want to have a child now. The second group, which I say unmet need for limiting, are women who said, I don't want to ever have any more children, but are unable to use contraception. And that is, I select those variables because the context of women's lives. Men say that it is women's business, and then the society restricts the choices of women. So this is what I did. I just ran something called correlation, which shows the association between percentage of pregnancies that were terminated in abortion in a district, the proportion of women who said it was because of unplanned pregnancy in that state or in that particular state, percentage of men who agreed that contraception is women's business. And if you see the termination of pregnancies is associated with men who say that contraception is women's business, but it is also associated, if you look at who has unplanned pregnancy, women who are unable to use spacing methods, or women who are unable to use, again, this blue color one, which you can see, which says 0.47, which is again significant, that is unmet need for spacing. So what does it tell you? In states which have a very higher proportion of men who believe that contraception is women's responsibility, if men are saying that it is women's responsibility, women are unable to use spacing methods. They should be using because men are saying it is women's responsibility, but they are unable to use. In those states where there is the women are saying they are using some contraception, abortion levels are quite high in those places. This doesn't make sense unless you understand unmet need looks at non-use of contraception. Now, if you're not using contraception or having an unwanted pregnancy, it means you don't have access to contraception. So how do you manage? You use abortion. So in states where higher percentage of women said they want unwanted pregnancy was a reason for abortion, their access to becoming pregnant forever is also very high. So in states where unmet need for spacing is high, that is when they say, I don't want to have a child now, and they are unable to use contraception. They are unable to also use contraception when they say, I don't want to have children ever. Now, what does this mean? States with higher proportion of men believe that contraception is women's responsibility. Women don't have access to spacing methods, but they use abortion to overcome that limitation. States which have higher proportion of women who say, I became pregnant, I want an abortion because I did not want to be pregnant, are also the states which have very high unmet need for not having children anymore. It means when men don't take responsibility, and someone had asked this question, why is it that there is no promotion of vasectomy for men? It is because of a gamut of patriarchal reasons where men don't take responsibility for contraception, and there is no state mechanism to encourage that taking of responsibility, and political groups don't take responsibility. I'm answering that in part because vasectomy was the means of contraception during the emergency, and no one has dared to revisit that because of subsequent electoral reverses. So when you look at it, absence of male responsibility, limited access to contraception for spacing and limiting pushes women into using abortion as a means of spacing, but we don't have enough of access to abortion for women. That is why the Supreme Court was exercised by this and said that please let us at least open the legal doors for women and not restrict it due to either marriage, due to conjugal rights, is giving them, because they are married now they have some rights, or because they are not married, withholding some rights, and withholding some rights because they are married, which is available to unmarried women. So what can we do as sexual and reproductive health advocates in this country? Merely, having this new enactment is a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing to have happened, but it will not, because if you look at the social context in which these rights are exercised, the Supreme Court is exercised. But does it mean immediately women will have reproductive autonomy with respect to abortion? The data tells us no. The context in which they can or cannot exercise MTP as a choice comes from a very gendered context, where men think contraception is women's responsibility, health system think women need permissions from partners and other family members, their body doesn't belong to them. Therefore, we need to start educating health systems about changes in the law, strengthen male responsibility for contraception so that women's reproductive autonomy is respected. Only when we do that will it help women realize the substantial reproductive freedoms that the Supreme Court has just given them. Merely, saying the law has changed, systems don't change that easily, and that is what the data is showing us. So I have also talked about the way forward, and that was the end of my presentation. I can take questions now with Vibhuti ma'am's permission.
Thank you, Professor Ramanathan, for such a wonderful presentation. I would like to ask Professor Patel to comment on what Professor Ramanathan said.
Yeah. So I think Dr. Ramanathan has very encapsulated the whole 75 years of India's journey of contraception, abortion, and how, under what circumstances and what are the social determinants of women going for abortion. I think you talked about the medical abortion, but Professor Mala Ramanathan, I would like to know about what is happening at the backdoor abortion, because still they are in a large, they are happening in a very great proportion. No, all are not medical abortion, but they are done by the many spurious people. So how does this new law take that into consideration, address this whole, which also results in mortality, no, of life?
Yes, it does. It at least provides women with the understanding that up to 24 weeks, between 20 to 24 weeks, you need 2 gynecologists. Otherwise, 1 gynecologist is enough to make available MTPs to women who say that my mental health is going to be adversely affected by the continuation of this pregnancy. That is all is needed for a woman, married or otherwise. If you say you are raped, you don't need to have an FIR. If you say I want abortion and I'm married, I don't need to get my husband, or, I have done extensive research on MTPs, and there is a thriving industry outside medical colleges which offer abortion, to rent a husband.
Oh.
Because they require, so you pay 250 rupees or something, someone will come and pretend to be husband and sign off on the consent form. It is not the woman's consent that is taken, it is the partner's consent.
Yeah.
This is all what registered medical practitioners do. And I don't blame them also, madam, because the social context, they say that people will come to our hospital, especially private sector, when a majority of abortion provision is, legal provisioning is from private sector. So private sector is a commercial enterprise. And this kind of hullabaloo outside a private hospital, large number of which are small units, clinics and other things, they need, goodwill of the community. Now, goodwill of the community comes from maintaining patriarchal norms.
Yeah.
So they don't want a hullabaloo by the husband and husband's relatives at their door. So they will say, bring the husband.
Yeah. But see, backdoor abortions are also thriving, no? By
Yes,
the unqualified people. Yeah.
Yes, that also happens. But collecting data on that is so much more difficult, barring the one abortion assessment project of India in 2020-21. Hardly any study has looked at illegal or backdoor abortions, which are more. You only get an understanding of it by indirectly by looking at proportion of maternal mortality, which is due to, problems with abortion, which mortality is in 2020, 7 or 8 is about 13% of the maternal mortality. So it tells you the contribution of these kinds of abortions to maternal mortality. So we need to be exercised by that. Merely having a law is not going to change anything for women until we educate women, we educate men, we educate doctors. We may think lawyers, we can ask Madam, Advocate Dr. Shalu Nigam, following the Supreme Court pronouncement on September 29th, 2022, Madam, would everyone or only those interested in women's health? A lot of them are not bothered. I hope she will.
But now we are inundated by young women approaching women's organizations, seeing that they are not getting abortion services. So if you leave it to the private sector, for them, assisted reproduction is a money spinner. But they say abortion doesn't pay much. Number two, they say that we don't want headache of sex selection, PCP and ET Act. So these are the two reasons for which even genuine seekers, they don't get it. And even during the pandemic even also we heard that.
Married women are also not having access. We know about it. Dr. Nigam, would you like to add to this a bit?
Yeah, surely, because, we have also seen, once the Supreme Court passed the judgment, it's okay, like it's, some people read it, some people don't. Even the courts, the lower courts, the high courts, then they come out with different interpretations of, even if the judgment is there, like we have seen in the domestic violence, that act about the right to share household. Now, it was very clearly mentioned in the act that, that women have right to reside in the shared household. But again, the Batra versus Batra judgment, which came where the court has really given a different kind of interpretation. And then again, in 2020, we have another judgment, which is exactly opposite to that kind of judgment. So again, the courts are giving, the judges have their own, maybe, the mindset or, what they're thinking. So based on that, people are giving judgment, the judges are giving judgments, and the courts down are not, they may have a different kind of, or depending on the facts of the case. So there is a lot of difference between once the judgment is pronounced and how it is being implemented on the ground. So maybe if today I file another case, the court may come with a, another kind of judgment. So that is something which is, we have to streamline the process, because again, awareness is not there. And then, the gender sensitization thing that we have to really start, even in the courts also, the judges and the lawyers, and as you say, that even the doctors need to be made aware of, what kind of, how the rights should be interpreted. The patriarchal mindset is there, and that needs to be changed. So I think that
another very important question debated in the women's movement is mandatory registration of abortion in POCSO cases. Now it puts the girls don't want to come out. The girls' mothers also don't want to come out. Now, how do we solve it? Because she wants abortion services, but she doesn't want it to be reported to the, officially.
That is what the MTP Act has, the amendments made on September 29th, 2022, frees the RMPs from. It does that as well. However, I found that Professor Veena Vaswani can also comment where she says even forensic experts are not aware of this. Professor Veena, would you like to comment on that? Ma'am, you're muted.
Just a minute.
I can add, well, we wait for Professor Veena Vaswani, that she actually, Dr. Veena?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah, please.
Okay. So the question is, there is a way, and there is another way which is quite broad. So given this choice, doctors generally fall by what is easy for them than what should be done. It becomes like earlier judgment, which means that, okay, we have to register it, we have to report it. Then the question of, by not reporting, they might ask me question, I may be called. Instead, to be on the safe side, let us do it. So for almost everything that the law has later on the judgment say that you need not do it, people fall back on the earlier to say that there is already an act. So that's only a judgment, but this was an act. So we'd rather go and to be on the safe side. Safe for whom? For doctors. But what is it in? Who is the service? Service is not meant for doctors. Service is meant for people who are availing of the service. But so this, actually, that's how we called Dr. Mala to speak to the forensic faculty, because we had a debate on this. And then we had such a case coming around, I think around 18 years, that she was married. And she married, I think when she was 5 months pregnant. So somebody saw some red light into it and then saying, no, we need to report it. So that is why we need very often, but then again, like Dr. Shalu said, if the court judgments are subsequently going back on what one said, there are multiple ways the court are going to give decision on, then again, people will follow what is best for them, not for the patient. What is easy, comfortable for them to follow, they will follow that. But I agree with what Mala says, because it has made it easy for them that even in the living in relationship and even in POCSO Act, even a 17-year-old girl, and it's a consensual sexual intercourse and they have agreed to it, but then it becomes mandatory to report, it would literally ruin their relationship. So that is how we need to look at, Thank you so much.
Yeah, there is a question.
They will go for backdoor abortion, no?
Then they will go for backdoor. And then we will have maternal mortality.
Correct. Yeah.
There is a question, Dr. Patel here.
Yeah, for you.
Is there any serious consequences to women's physical health to use any pills or contraceptive?
Yeah.
Actually, I should point out, Dr. Dolly Mishra, the problem comes, most of public health enactments and public health choices are not absolute in themselves. They have to be contrasted. See, if women didn't have access to contraception, they would get pregnant when they don't want to be pregnant. If they got pregnant, they would, and they don't want to be, they would seek backdoor abortions. Out of those kind of women who died in childbirth or due to pregnancy-induced causes, out of every 100 women, 13 women are due to botched up abortions. Now, if that is the consequence, this many deaths would be averted significantly if women did not get pregnant. How can they not get pregnant? Only by access to contraception. It is not that any contraception is without any problems, as doctors would tell you. There can certain first generation oral contraceptive pills had thrombosis, deepened thrombosis is a consequence. They came up with modified, fourth generation contraceptives. So each time we improve the contraceptive because the right to a pleasurable sexual life is also the right of men and women. If that is the right, pregnancy is born as a consequence by only women. Contraception prevents that. That should be something that is also the right of all men and women. When we haven't enabled that, then we have a serious problem, right? That is why then we have all these backdoor abortions. I don't know if I have directly answered your question, but in public health, we are always very consequentialists.
All of us are on the same page. We have really complemented each other and made the issue very, very relevant for the participants in terms of action also. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. There's one more question from Kevana Desaiji. What is the level of availability, viability, and affordability of women's condom?
Women's condom was tested, okay? It was tested for a while. But I don't see it, being marketed by the government of India under its family planning program. Basically, I have a suspicion because it requires, setting up technological, what shall I call, plants, one. And the single most producer of condoms in the country is already using up a major sources of the rubber. This is what I think. I think, and Professor Patel can correct me, I'm speculating in this context that they may not be willing to switch. One. Second, as a consequence, what we also see is the demand for, similar contraceptive, diaphragm, has more or less gone off. It's completely vanished. On the contrary,
it was there during second 5-year plan.
Yeah.
Diaphragms were distributed by family planning centers during second 5-year plan, but they did not succeed because women touching vagina is it is not taboo in our culture. So women did not accept.
So, therefore now we have Antara and Chaya, Santa Roman. I don't know how to pronounce it correctly. Dr. Vaswani can correct me. And Antara, the DMPA, have been introduced because they have been introduced in the family planning program. But my work in Bihar tells me that in spite of the Mission Parivar, because it is not so easily accessible. It's one thing to say it is available. All these things are theoretically available in some place. But if you go to the family wellness centers, family welfare centers, or the family health centers in our communities, it is not there. So Asha workers who promote it are struggling by taking the women to another center, calling and finding out is it there or not. And it's an uphill struggle to access contraception in this country of women's choice. And we can't blame only Asha worker because they are struggling also with the women. They are in solidarity with women. But we need to produce more, we need to transport more, we need to have a supply chain that is efficacious, we need to have warehousing norms. That is what the Supreme Court was talking about when it said structural reforms to enable access. Just having MTP Act, when the system doesn't take cognizance of what steps it needs to take to make that access something, which is substantial for women's lives, is a big story, so we all have our jobs cut out for us. We have to, take those things that the Supreme Court has given us, talk to the governments, talk to local governments, talk to state governments, not to enact, population policy laws that say 2-child family norm and penalize women. Because women don't want to have more children. They wind up having children because they don't have access to contraception. So whose fault is it? Then do you penalize women for getting pregnant? That's so unfair. So we need to knock on so many doors for the women whose voices we have to become. Does it answer the question? I don't know.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I guess it does. There's one more question from Kivana Desaiji only. With increasing religious fundamentalism, do you see a threat to abortion from all religious sects?
I don't know. That's a very difficult question to answer in the context of what has happened in the United States and what our Supreme Court has pronounced on September 29th. In India, there has not been a kind of any religious pronouncement, even on the MTP Act. That has been left to civilians. Unless we do something there has been a fine balance on that MTP Act for whatever reason. I really don't know why it has been that way. But it has been that way, and Vibhuti madam can correct me if I am wrong. In fact, getting religious leaders into this doesn't serve the purpose, and a lot of us have been very careful to never do that. And the one place where it had a space was in the ICPD 1994, when the constant presence of women's health advocates, a very, welfare-oriented health secretary at that point in time enabled India to be an advocate for the ICPD mandate itself. And somehow we have never gone back on that. Even though we have let many things get eroded from that, with regard to abortion, we have not gone back. I hope it continues to prevail. Vibhuti madam,
campaign against sex selection we had Maulvi Saabs and Jathedar Saab of Gurudwaras and religious leaders like Baba Ramdev and also Morari Bapu. In their discourses, they were bringing up that sex-selective abortions are crime. We can't eliminate daughters. So it is in that context, the abortion was discussed by the religious leaders. Both Sikh,
Not against
Hindu and-
abortion per se.
yeah, not abortion per se. Only abortion of a girl, sex-selective abortion.
Yeah. So let us hope that that remains a bogey and doesn't become a reality.
Correct.
That's all I can say.
Yeah.
Does it answer your question, madam?
Thank you so much, ma'am. I guess you have answered it very nicely. Now I'll hand over to Naina to proceed further.
Now I would like to invite our fourth expert for today's session, Professor Vijay Lakshmi Nanda. Professor Nanda is Principal and Professor of Political Science, Miranda House, University of Delhi. And ma'am's topic is Women's Right Movement, highlighting women's reproductive rights and choices. Welcome, ma'am, and over to you, ma'am.
It's muted.
It's working, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you, Naina, for allowing this. I'm just sharing my screen. Please allow me to do so. Can you see my screen? Is it visible? Thank you, and thank you, Professor Patel. And I'm sorry for not being very, clear with all my instructions. But you will have to excuse me because I'm part of various selection committee meetings, so it becomes difficult. So I will be taking up the issue of reproductive rights and gender biased sex selection. And I will also examine, I think the speaker before me also was examining that. I'm going to look at the dilemmas of feminist politics, because this is what we were just discussing, that how are we going to discuss about gender biased sex selection, or are we going to talk about the right to abortion? I will take you through a journey. It's my research journey, so I'm going to share with you some of the slides. Some of them may not be very, very detailed in terms of the subject in underhand, but let us just begin. I'm not able to change it. Now this is, can you see it? Are you able to see it?
Yeah, we are able to see your slides, but they are in working mode, so you can make it in a slideshow mode.
Okay, just a minute. Just a minute. Let me. Just 1 minute. I'll try.
Next to that.
I'm just trying for the slideshow. Here it is. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Is this better?
Fine.
Yeah. Okay. So now I use a quotation that I really love. This is from Joshua Cohen from Martha Nussbaum. It says, "Justice is hard, and it demands our devotion as well as our understanding. For that reason, it must grip our emotions. We must feel its absence and presence with the depth of feeling that we associated with love." Now, this is very important because what we are discussing here is not a discussion only on understanding reproductive rights, but looking at gender justice. And this should matter to us, and we should be able to associate with our emotions on this matter. There is another very important saying by Maria Mais, who talks about the fact that in order to even understand a thing, one must change it. And this gets contextualized when you look at reproductive rights, reproductive autonomy, or the dilemmas that exist in that field. This is a cover of The Economist, and it says, "Gender side, what happened to 100 million baby girls?" As you can see very well, these are pink boots that you can see there. This is on the cover of The Economist. And definitely they are talking about sex-selective abortion. Now, when they talk about sex-selective abortion, very clearly, you can see that they are using all kinds of gender stereotypes to talk about it. One is that they're using the term gender side, which is by itself not a term at all. And then they are talking about 100 million baby girls, thereby stigmatizing the Asian community and the other communities who are associated with sex selection or sex selective abortion without questioning the way in which developed countries are associated with this, in the way in which there is a nexus between the capitalist market or the global capitalist market on this particular issue. And I will unpack that later if I get the time. Now, this is adult sex ratio. This is a very old one. This is 2010. In that, we are looking at adult sex ratios because that's an important thing that you can look at, and just clearly you can see that how we are doing in terms of adult sex ratio. But this is the declining child sex ratio, which Professor Patel is also very clearly knowing. We don't have a census till now, so I don't know what is happening in 2021, but I believe with the NFHS and there is some improvement. But this has been the decline, and the decline has always been steady. And we all here are aware of the fact that this is only because of daughter aversion or sex selective abortion or gender biased sex selection. There are so many terminology I use, and this is again the dilemma of feminist politics. Some of us who were introduced to this term used to talk about female feticide, and that brought in the overlap over the right to abortion. Many times the word female got dropped and feticide came up, and the association with murder became very, very, and that also reflected upon the reproductive rights and autonomy of women. And therefore the terminology was then changed by feminists who looked at it to sex selective abortion, what we are calling as termination of female fetuses before birth, which is being done only in order to get rid of girl children. And that became important as a terminology. Then you use the word pre-birth elimination of females, thereby making it a little more sanitized. Then comes the term son preference, which was used, but even son preference was not strong enough a word, because largely it is a universal term. Many societies and communities, not just in India, but all over the world, can have certain forms of son preference. But daughter aversion, not loving their daughters enough, not even to give birth to them, something that our Prime Minister also has announced, which is the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. So really invoking families to love their daughters. So that aversion that is there, that is very, very important for us to understand. Why do we need to talk about reproductive rights of women in India? Why is it so important? It is an important concept in law and policy. There is legal support found in our constitution, found in the international instruments like CEDAW. There is consensus around the idea that freedom of choice is essential to map the course of one's life, not just for women, but also for men. Yet, what is its meaning? What are its legal implications? What is its value? That is never really discussed. The moment you say a person is, has autonomy in reproductive matters, that uncertainty always exists. That is why right now you're looking at the age of, consent. You're looking at, engaging with notions around how abortion is to be dictated, understood. Not just abortion, but reproductive autonomy is not only associated with abortion. All other forms, even giving birth. What is the legal implication? What is its value? These are questions that I leave you with, and we can discuss it later. Now in India, and I'm only looking at gender-biased sex selection, there is a state discourse. There is the national discourse. There is also a global discourse. So when we talk about it, let's say from a gender, that is why I showed you the cover of The Economist. And it is also to show you the kind of biases that exist in the global discourse regarding women and regarding countries like ours. So the equality discourse is something that you and I are engaging with, but the state discourse or even the global discourse has always been about numbers. So whenever you look at it, even whether it is the census or anywhere, they're only talking about the declining numbers. There is the concept, the overarching concept of gender equality, which is present in the idea of reproductive rights or reproductive autonomy, that needs to be brought into the discourse. It is still not there. The other discourse, both within state and global discourse, is crime. So you have the PNDT or the PCPNDT Act, or you have the Dowry Prohibition Act. All these acts are about making it a criminal act. However, while you are looking at it from a criminal point, a criminal justice kind of a point of view, the idea of it being part of substantive justice or gender justice, that is again something that we are not engaging with enough. And that is also something that we need to, because they are somehow being posed against each other in some ways. So people will say, oh, the Dowry Act is being misused, or that this women are using this particular law. So there is always that discourse also happening because of the way in which it is being seen as a criminal, justice system, but not as a substantive gender justice. Then people feel that you're only talking about rights of women. There is not enough discussion about the fact that this is not just about rights of women. Reproductive rights of women in India is also about the rights of man and woman and human beings across. So when you're talking about rights of one particular category, you're talking about everyone's rights. And there is an ethical point from where we are bringing it. And I think these are the discourses that need to be engaged with. Now, what is the policy response continuum in this? When it comes to gender-biased sex selection, I'm mainly talking about sex-selective abortion as a case study. You are looking at a supply side. What is the supply side? You're looking at reproductive technologies, which can detect the sex of the fetus, tell you whether it is female, you can get rid of it, or you're looking at ultrasound, you're looking at amniocentesis, whatever you have. And for that, many laws were made. First, it was the PNDT Act 1994, Professor Patel and others, Professor Jeshani, all of you were associated with it. Then you brought in PCPNDT, because not only were you looking at it at a preconceptual stage, you're looking at it even before that, which is your sex selection. That also was. So the supply side was questioned, and you brought in a law for that. So the Beti Bachao part, actually, it is the law, PCPNDT. Beti Bachao is basically implementation of PCPNDT. Then comes the demand side, which is coming from families. And how are you looking at it? You look at gender discrimination. So you have policies and statements concerning women and girls. So you look at Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, or other forms of women's empowerment, financial schemes, other laws that have it. So these are the other kind of statements that you are making. So then when you look at the reproductive body, all that you're doing is talking about reproduction from the point of view of surviving pregnancy, which is bringing down maternal mortality. It has really been brought down very well. I'm using that poster to look at how India's maternal health crisis actually is just not dying while giving birth. That was the major concern for us. And now we have really improved on that front. But imagine that something which is considered as natural and normal was actually a survival risk for us. So reproductive right for us was basically about giving birth and surviving, which we have been able to do very well due to interventions by the state, interventions by feminist groups, by many such women's groups, by health groups. So this is a very important thing, that all your right here, when you're talking about reproductive rights at one point of time, was just surviving, pregnancy. Even till now, it is a reality for some. I mean, although much improvement has happened in this, and the numbers bear us out on that. Then again, when you talk about reproductive rights, how does the state look at women, or how does the state policy look at women? Where are they present? In the constitution, where are they present? So, or in the law, they're either as litigants, they can make use of that law and become litigants, or they can be supplicants asking, or they could be activists, or they are victims, or they are beneficiaries. So basically the rights discourse is around these. So the woman, in terms of an overarching understanding women's rights from a perspective of them not being part of this discourse as participants, as citizens, that particular point is not present, even if the laws and everything, but that we need to bring in. We need to bring in that particular angle, that just as citizens, so when the moment we say reproductive rights of women in India, somehow it is like we are supplicants or we are beneficiaries. So where is that language going to change? That is also an important point. Now, how has the feminists engaged with the state? They have been confrontationist, largely they have been confrontationist. Some of them have been very reformist. They have worked, some have been cooperative. They have worked with the state. They have been part of state bodies. I have been part of state bodies. Many of you have been. They have been collaborationists. They have done things together. So there are various ways in which the feminists have engaged with state in India, across also in the global. Then what is the dilemma then for the feminists? And I am using this as a way of looking. I'm personally also trying to understand that journey. Number one is, do we want the law, or do we want to go beyond the law? Because if we are going to find every fault with the law, then we have to decide. Do we go pro-life, or do we go pro-choice for reproductive rights? Do we see women as active agents I mean, the moment we see women as active agents, we also have to know that women can also be criminals. They can also be participating in this process, or are we to see them only as passive victims? Do we want monetary incentives to enhance the value of the girl child, or are we only going to look at a rights-based approach? Do you go with the state or without the state? These are the dilemmas I'm posing. Now I come to the first. Some feminists emphasize on creation of laws, and I am part of it. I think some of us here have been, while others believe that laws may themselves become a site of gender discrimination, since they will bring about power relations, they bring about bureaucratic control. Many people mentioned here, Flavia Agnes, Ratna Kapoor, Nivedita Menon, they have all spoken against the law, subversion beyond law, they have always talked about. Then pro-life and pro-choice, I'm using here posters of a school competition on sex selective abortion or female infanticide. Please take a look very closely at the posters. You will see that it is almost as if the woman herself is getting rid of the fetus, and the way it is being seen, it is almost extremely, anti-women in that sense, and the whole way of looking as the woman as being the perpetrator. So, and also seeing sex selective, any kind of abortion like this, there is that overlap over the right to abortion, that women are perpetrators, they are the ones who are creating. So this language can become very confusing. So how this language of pro-life has been, it has been taken over by the, hijacked by the so-called, the church. I mean, the church basically hijacked and called it pro-life so that women were seen as pro-choice. But no feminists are actually anti-life. They're talking about life, but whose life? It could be the life of the woman if she is in danger, or it could be a pro-choice, which is an empowered choice to give birth to a girl child. So there are different ways of looking at even, I mean, abortion is not necessarily only about exercising a choice in that sense. It is an empowered and informed choice. So that angle is not brought in, and this is the general understanding, and we need to work with this also. Now, this is the Nawashahar experience by this deputy commissioner in Nawashahar. Many of you may be aware of it, where he started monitoring pregnancies and he was trying a way to stop sex selection. Now, in doing so, he started going to various homes, community was involved. They started shaming families which were giving birth to or which had had an abortion. They were trying to, and they did a lot of good. But here, elements of coercion, fear, limiting the rights of women were built to the strategies, perhaps without meaning to. And it did well, but once he moved out, they could not sustain it. Activists did talk about how they need to bring about a delicate balance between fetal rights and women's rights. And this is also something for us to understand. Then we come to women as active agents or passive victims. So this is Mitu's story. And Mitu passed away in 2019. And she used to always tell me that every time I go to the court, I'm looked down upon because I'm fighting. My daughters are alive. My husband is a doctor, my family members. So, is this something that I should be fighting for? Because this is what everybody tells me. Everything is all right. Just continue with your life. She says, maybe if my daughters had not survived or I had not survived, my voice could be heard more. So she was seen as an active agent. So there was always this distrust about her. I cannot talk more about her. Many of you may know she was one of the first complainants for the FICI-PNDT Act. In 2005, she decided to go for this and she gave birth to twin daughters who are doing well now. But she was disappointed to find that even the authorities who were implementing the act, they also had a lot of gender biases. And no amount of awareness had changed their mindset. They all thought she should go back and settle. And there was always this pressure without understanding that she was being forced. She just wanted some justice, and it did not work out in that way. She passed away at a very young age. She was only 44, 45. But she, however, inspired many women to fight for their rights and create a gender just world for girls in India. And this is a very, very important idea. Then you come to whether it should be incentives or rights-based approach. And there you have a number of schemes, which is called conditional cash transfers. Means save your daughter, take this money. So it was used in Mexico, in other places, Colombia. They had short-term ones, cash transfer for immediate poverty alleviation, or long-term, boosting human and social capitals. So you had your Ladli Lakshmi schemes for improving the status of the girl child. I'm not going to do the whole reading. So there was all of this. So you change family aptitudes, you raise the age of marriage, encourage girls to be self. It was all done with a good idea. However, it led to certain difficulties, and we will just talk about that. Did it bring about a turnaround in declining sex ratio? Not much improvement was seen at that level. I mean, not that it was, did it enhance a daughter's worth? So this is here, I'm using a Beatles song, Can Money Buy Me Love? So it is like that. So it did not really enhance a daughter's worth. Everybody did make use of that financial incentive. This was done during the former, government. They were trying, and many of us worked with it. And then did it bring about an aspiration for education or marriage? So by 18 years, they got that money, whatever it was. So the idea was that it will go into her marriage dowry. So that became the major thing. And that led to a larger or a comprehensive program, which is the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, which put emphasis on education. And I think that way it is a better program. And it brought in tri-ministerial, 4 ministerial programs together. And here, what is the impact? Who gets left out, when and how? These are also some things we can study. I'm just talking about my study. When I looked at it, the beneficiaries said that the highest priority was to use it for their daughter's marriage. And they said dowry is something we have to provide. And they said that while they considered they could spend on education, they concluded that this money should be spent on marriage. But now, this is my study in 2009 or 10. But recently I did a study, and I'm not showing it here, but I saw that a lot of emphasis on girls' education has improved. That is a thing that has really, and that is something for us to study. But we saw across families, importance to girls' education has improved, although marriage continues to be a significant indicator of women's status. So, we saw that gender-biased sex selection was happening in those areas. People said, okay, we will pay 3,500 and we'll have 1 lakh. So by the second born daughter, they would think, okay, but by the next order, it would change. So John Rays also said, can you bribe parents to keep their daughters? Are you reinforcing stereotypes that daughters are liabilities? These questions are there. I'm not saying, however, making it into a scholarship is a better idea, rather than saying we are giving you a Ladli scheme because you gave birth to a daughter. So certain ways, and I think a lot of work was done through a number of women's groups, and many of those ideas have been incorporated into certain schemes. Again, I think it's very important for us to understand why we run down this idea of the marriage spending. Many young women told me that is the only time they get celebrated. And that is the only time when they look good, and there is a lot of emphasis on their celebration. So they wanted that. And they thought it was important that they should be celebrated. And that is something we see. So while not being, I think we need not be so holy about it, in the sense that we can try to, be very academic and intellectual, but the idea is that self-worth of women through glamorized ideas of marriage and sexuality, that needs to be looked into very categorically as to why do they feel like that? Why do women all over the world, not just in India, feel this necessity to be celebrated in this particular way, where a lot of emphasis is placed on. So that these are issues, but I believe that it is no longer such a gender divide, and it also needs to be engaged how this is coming. But some of them are looking at bargaining power, decision-making power, and that we can look at. Now, do we go with the state or without the state? Now, this is a case study of the 2-child norm. This is Odisha, where they were implementing a 2-child norm for women's, like decision-making. And this is why reproductive autonomy and rights. So this is the women there. I'm talking about Bimla Naik, her husband, they were actively involved with local committees, and they wanted to contest for local elections, but they could not do it because there was a 2-child norm. And they were contesting for corporators post. And so she did ask that I was not eligible. However, I have 3 daughters, whereas that man, the whole idea of how reproductive right works also against women because they have more children. So she says, why can I not contest? Why should I not be given a little more importance? Because I have 3 daughters. You are saying people do not want to have daughters, but I have 3 daughters. So I think that was also a perspective that we need to build in, that when we bring about modernizing small family norms, or we bring about 2-child or 1-child norm, how it impacts women's rights, reproductive rights, essentially very, very badly, because the onus is again on the woman. not on the man. It is good to have small families, but again, that should come about through an empowered and informed choice, like the National Population Policy has talked about, a basket of, reproductive facilities, whatever it is. The methods should be clear. The woman should be informed. She should be empowered to make those choices rather than a top-down approach. So that is something. Now this, I'm going to end with this. So let us take a look at a synthesis. So what should we have when it comes to reproductive autonomy? We should look at rights and entitlements. We should also look at capabilities, not just rights, but whether they are translating into capabilities. Because you can have a right, but like with Martha Nussbaum or with Amartya Sen, this whole idea of capabilities is important. So 10 capabilities Nussbaum has talked about: life, liberty, integrity, that you should be able to exercise them. You should be capable enough to exercise them. Then there is this work of Anupama Roy, where she says build voice, agency, citizenship. There are others like Spivak, Nancy Fraser, Jill Steens, who talk about strategic essentialism, that even if we are divided, the women's groups have dilemmas about, many women's groups never came together on sex-selective abortion. I mean, the state has done a better job than feminists have on this issue. They have been divided. So they should have looked at it from the point of view of empowered and informed choice, rather than just as a right against. So that essentialism, that we can be divided, we should come together. And we should come together on certain grounds. That is important. Then we also need to look at social protection schemes within broader development efforts. So all these social protection schemes that are there for women should not be seen only as for women, but within broader development efforts. And that is how it should be. And we should, this is an idea of Brooke Ackerley, where she says feminists have to jump and, have a jugaad kind of a concept, curb cut, bring themselves together. And they should look at intersectionality and, how intersectionality, class, caste, ethnicity, they should all bring that together. And that is the best way. This is a UNFPA understanding that how do you look at it? You bring about more assets for women. It cannot be just reproductive rights on its own. So they should earn more, they should own more, they should inherit, they should have autonomy where their ability to make choices are there, physical safety is there, mobility is there, their laws are there, but these laws should work. And and in aging, there should be social protection, not just for women, but also for men. Children cannot be the only source of support. Policy response to ensure social care is a must. And this is important. Then I'm summing this up, the state. So you cannot abandon schemes. Social protection schemes are necessary. Proactive role of state is necessary. State may not always be a benevolent representation of public good, but state is a site for these struggles. They will allocate resources. And the marginalized and excluded groups should participate. They should ask for their rights. They should look at more inclusive systems of social protection, equitable paths to economic growth. That should be there. Now, one is the state, but beyond the state, these reproductive technologies are coming from the market and a global market. In fact, many of the technologies are coming from Taiwan, China, from all of them are making use of the son preference market here or the daughter. So what should we do? We should not blame the way in which the economist is blaming us, the non-Western cultures or the victims. That should not happen. A transnational gender disparity should be looked at. These are concept of transactional, cycles of gender vulnerability. So we are vulnerable now, but it is possible that some others may be vulnerable later. So that is how it should be understood, reproductive rights. Look what's happening in the US. Look at how they have curbed right to abortion. India is in a much better place. Even their child care or their maternity care leaves are so badly against women. So we have to understand also in a global perspective how we need to look at reproductive rights and autonomy. And then we should have networks, conversations, NGOs, everybody should get together, even governments, conversations, conferences, and campaigns should be talked about. And there should be created an epistemic community. Alison Asseter talks about an epistemic who are bound by a set of values which are emancipatory. And we will remove oppressive power relations. So we should also support women in the US and other parts who are fighting for their rights. Even the basic right to abortion is being fought for, and that language needs to be talked. So a shared language and a commitment to democracy and equality, I think that will make for the larger idea of reproductive rights and autonomy in India. And thank you very much. That's the gist of what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nanda, for such a valuable information. I would like to ask for Professor Vibhuti Patel to comment on what Professor Nanda said.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Nanda, for giving such a comprehensive view and also bringing in the political economy aspect, that how the world capitalism and the new reproductive technologies, they are equally responsible for the way. And our global experience is that the pro-choice lobby globally is so powerful. So to accept sex-selective abortion within the rubric of violence against women, they are not ready to accept. They said, if Indian women don't like daughters, let them have a choice. No, if this is the way even the feminists from the Western world think, then it is not going, because declining sex ratio is not a problem of only in South Asia. 80 countries have an adverse sex ratio. So it is a global problem. We have brought it to the center stage of feminist discourse, while other regions have not. But same in the Central Asia, then also Middle East, here, everywhere the question of discriminatory attitude towards women and girls has been there. Daughter aversion has been there. They may be using different technologies, but Korea has the one country where they took a very strong action, no? And after that, the scenario changed. But they took like more of a state, took a very strong action against the gynecologists who were practicing, and they said they would not reveal the sex of fetus. But in this scenario, what do you think that is generating hope? Girls who have been eliminated, yes, 100 million girls have been eliminated years, but those who have survived, do you see a different temperament amongst them?
Yes. Can I take, should I answer that to you? Yes, I think, and I was trying to refer to the latest study that I did. So we were looking at, it's an ICSSR supported study where we were looking at violence against women and gender discrimination, looking at child sex ratio. So we were seeing that, so our understanding is that a large number of women now have come forward to support their daughters in their education. That aspiration for better education for daughters, that has come to the mindset, at least in attitudinally, not just mothers, but even grandparents. We saw, and this is, we are trying to look at the study and we'll be publishing it. Even grandparents were talking about it, and there is a focus. However, that focus is kind of, one thing is it's a very good thing, but there is also an utilitarian side to it. So all daughters have to prove themselves always. They have to be the best in their field. So there are walls celebrating daughters who are doing very well. UPSC is one lead. So there is that also. It is not as if, they can, if they are not doing well, then that can be a huge question. So there is an added responsibility and burden, but yet at the same time, some stereotypes have been removed. Other than that, girls, I mean, across gender spectrum, but, girls, young girls in villages and other parts also have role models who are in their neighborhood. These are not role models. Earlier on, the role, Kalpana Chawla and all of those, Sania Mirza, that's the kind of, but now they have role models in their hometowns. Many of them used to be the first generation learners. So their hometowns have spread some girls. So they are also learning from that. UPSC is a big draw. They all want to be in bureaucracy. That becomes a major draw. They want to come to cities to study. That is also there. So I'm seeing attitudinally some change, some support also from first generation learners to their, so that is changing. It's still very nebulous, but it is changing. But what is going to be difficult to tackle is marriage. And that is why a lot more work needs to be done on dowry spending, women's marriage, decision-making processes within marriage, domestic violence, because that continues to be a problem ailing women, not just in India, but all over the world. The kind of, unequal relationships within, that is what that's another part. But in terms of reproductive rights, there is also understanding. And young women have an understanding of how to protect themselves and all of that. But at the same time, it is half-baked knowledge. Taking care of, STIs, the health angle of it, how they should take care, that knowledge base needs to be developed. Now there is discussion. women are, because, you know, I think some commercial films, whether we like it or not, have done a lot of good. Padman, for example, has brought a thing to the center stage. Young girls are ready to discuss. So all of menstrual health is brought to the forefront, but it is stopping at the level of awareness. They are not able to really understand what are the ways in which to protect themselves. So that language needs to be opened up. They also want to be employed. They want to work. These are, you know, aspirations are there. Some work needs to be done. And also we need, I think it's important that we do not over intellectualize it, and accept the fact that certain things which we may not have believed would work have started working. In the sense, like I'm saying, I mean, I would have thought commercial film may not be the best way to show this, but I have seen a lot of attitude, behavioral change with films also.
Even Dr. G, Dr. G.
Dr. G, for example, you can see that Dr. G, Padman, and Thappad, for example. We showed these films to the community, our girls also, through our policy center and gender lab from college. I see it has an impact, and a lot of first generation learners. But other than that, young women, because of the burden, this burden to perform, their parents are spending a lot on them. They had double, so there is a whole lot of pressure. And so that stress bit amongst young women is very high now. And we have not understood that patriarchy was also benevolent. And equality can be oppressive, and we also have to understand that bit. That conversation has never happened.
But
and
now the benevolent patriarchy is replaced by the complete, very hostile and
yes, pressure on them. So they are now feeling that. So that those whole idea of bringing about equality with pressure, how do we tackle that? So there is going to be that adjustment. But I would think we all, I think, have to suffer from the disease of hope. That is an important one to suffer from. We have to hope. I see a lot. Our girls, they are also performing, doing great. But apart from that, I think happiness is also important, and that should be given. Like they don't always have to be utilitarian in their approach, and young women should realize that even basically just being yourself is good enough.
Yes. Very important. Very important. Now, the last question, I think Dr. Kevna Desai, who has done her PhD in sociology on declining sex ratio in the city of Baroda. Her field work was in Baroda. So, Kevna Di, I see your question. Can you unmute yourself and ask? Dr. Kevna Desai, are you there? Hello?
Ma'am, I don't think so.
Yeah, I see the question.
Yeah.
It's about cross-cultural bride practice. Yes, I didn't go there because we were discussing a particular, but my study, the study that I did.
She can't unmute. Kevna is saying, Dr. Kevna is saying she's unable to unmute. Please unmute.
Now I can unmute, but I think she's already read the question.
No.
Go ahead.
I saw your question. Should I answer it?
Yes, ma'am. Please.
Yeah. So, okay, Dr. Desai, actually, the issue, I did the study, and a lot of other studies have been done by people like Ravinder, Mary John, Rajni Palriwal on this issue of what happens, what are the consequences of sex-selective abortion. And many of us are aware that this, like they say in single quotation marks, one can say that you kill a daughter to buy a bride. It's a double burden on women. But yes, there has been a lot of cross-cultural practices. People talk about trafficking women from one area which has a daughter, surplus, and there is also poverty driving it, and they bring it to daughter deficit areas. And we did see that. However, I would not want to paint everything with one brush. Some of these cross-cultural marriages, other things are through trafficking, are through bride buying, but some of them are also arranged through various methods. Many of them have been terrible for those women because there is greater violence. They have less negotiating powers. For example, a woman from Jharkhand in Haryana has less bargaining power. She's cut off from, and she doesn't understand the language. At the same time, there are some women who have come in from Kerala to other parts like Haryana, and they have changed the structure of the family. So I wouldn't want to paint it all with one brush, but we did notice that they were seen as the group, about 200 women that we interviewed, that they would face greater violence because of their lack of negotiations, bargaining, moving out to their families, no resources, and also being seen as the bahar wale. Like like there's somebody who's from the outside, and even their children not being seen because of, however, like in all cross-cultural, diverse ways, there are also sensitive men and women who have been able to cross that barrier. And there are many case studies which are showing, however, the larger part story is one of violence and discrimination and not a equal marriage. And there are some which are showing changes where the woman has been able to bring in a lot of bargaining and negotiating. So yes, that is true. We did watch that in Haryana and UP, especially where I studied it.
Thank you, Professor Nanda, for answering the question. I would like to ask Professor Nanda to give us key takeaway remarks.
Okay, that's a difficult one always for me, because my key takeaway remark would be that when we look at reproductive rights of women in India, we have to look at it from a holistic perspective, because we are not talking only about rights here of women, we are talking about rights of everyone. And we are using the gender lens to study rights. And that should be very important for us, and not just rights, but we are looking at the larger context of justice. We are looking at ethics. And we need to speak about it not only from a national perspective, but from a global perspective. I think it's important for us to do that. The second takeaway, I think, would be that feminist politics needs to come together, especially from the global discourse point. We need to come together and understand that we have sex-selective abortion. We have, in fact, a medical termination of pregnancy act is slightly supportive of women's right to abortion, but our context is different, and we need to come together on this. And even within India or outside India, this concept is important. And safe and legal abortion rights are good for everyone, not just for us. But at the same time, sex-selective abortion is a reality, like Professor Patel says, in 80 countries of the world, and that cannot be ignored. And that's a takeaway. And the last takeaway for me is to understand that many of us need to use a more, I would say, a more syncretic lens to understand that there are many things which we may not be able to academically break down or intellectualize or see from a gender, but which is working. So this curb cut feminism, or just going around and trying to, finally it is in the practice. So if something is working, we need to acknowledge that. I personally feel the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao has a lot of, it's kind of comprehensive, and we need to look at that particular legislation again and see what other linkages we can make. We can have these conversations amongst us and be able to understand. And like I said, with commercial films, whether that is one lens we can use. We did talk about religious leaders. So for some it may work, for some it may not. So what are the ways we can make these linkages going beyond our own comfort zones? I think that is a takeaway for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Nanda, for enriching session. As we have come to the end of day one.
Naina, before we can go to Vibhuti, ma'am, to conclude, if she has any remarks. Vibhuti, ma'am.
Yes. Vibhuti, ma'am.
Yeah, I think all the four presentations, they complemented each other. Dr. Veena Vaswani's presentation on the overall macro policies of population control, both how the India adopting population policy as a state policy way back in 1950, and what are the implications of these policies in different states, regional variations that we are seeing, the population control, difference between population control and reproductive rights that was emphasized by her. Second presentation, which brought in the question of law and the live-in relationship. I think more or less the pattern of subordination and violence against women is very much there, but with the thing that you also have parental, there is a stigma against how does a couple survive when there is a stigma. She also brought in the issue of honor crimes, that when the choice-based partners are selected, you see even the natal families, the families of both the boys and girls, they also become very violent, and what happens. So we have the gap between the progressive laws that we have and the actual reality. I think the same dilemma which Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar had way back in 1950 when he presented Constitution of India, that we have come up with the most progressive constitution, but the reality is very different and we need to bridge the gap between the two. That came out very sharply in Dr. Advocate Shalu Nigam's presentation. The third presentation by Dr. Mala Ramanathan about the abortion law and the abortion, the comparison between abortion, medical termination of pregnancy. That's what in India it is called as a medical termination of pregnancy. How did it come? Did it come because of the demand of the women's movement, or it was by the state? And it was more seen as number of pregnancies averted. So it was a part of the overall population stabilization policy, number one, and number two, that unsafe abortions, the backdoor abortions, were leading to extremely high maternal mortality rate, which was also highlighted in the Towards Equality report, which is also now highlighted in the Millennium Development Goal and Sustainable Development Goal, that India has really very high maternal mortality rate, which can't be explained only by poverty. So there is something in the way the status of women and the socio-cultural determinants of the women's predicament within the household, within the community, they are also responsible. So that came out. And the question of POCSO Act, because the POCSO Act, when there is an underage sexual violence and the girl becomes pregnant, and when the question of reporting comes, then the girl is in a very, very dire circumstances, social ostracization, abandonment by the family, and the parents also not wanting this kind of reporting. Otherwise, it would jeopardize her marriage prospects, or even it would jeopardize her integration within the community. So these are very complex issues that Dr. Mala Ramanathan brought out with a very, very strong documentation at a macro level, the metadata that she used, and also the short gave us a very comprehensive list of recommendations. And the last presentation by Professor Vijayalakshmi Nanda also brought in the macro element, how the neoliberal global capitalism is creating, and the medical industry, the medical technologies and the new reproductive technologies are also used for femicide, and the kind of the nomenclature, the semantics, the language terminologies that are used by both the state and the non-state actors like a women's movement. And even among the women's movement, we don't have a unanimous position, but still now we have reached a state, and now the girls who have not been eliminated, who have survived, they have a different mood. They are in a defiant mood. They are precautious. And at the same time, we see both in public sector as well as private sector educational institutions, even in the professional courses, parents are ready to spend on women, on girls, on their daughters' education. So we are having millions of Indian girls who have a degrees, but at the same time, different newer forms of subordination have come, because these degrees are not translating into career or job, because we have currently 19% of women are in part of the workforce. And as she ended with the UNFPA slogan, that's why it is important. One is access to safe contraception and safe reproductive services. Number two, the economic empowerment that ensures decision-making power, and also third, the changing the mindset of the community. So we need to be hopeful, and I think the hopeful statement of Professor Vijayalakshmi Nanda made, I would like to reiterate that hopeful, we have to work collectively, and when we join our mind, when all of us come together, we can come up with a collective wisdom which would lead us to empowerment of women and girls. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Patel, for concluding today's session. As we have come to the end of day one of a 3-day immersive online legal awareness and certificate training program on reproductive and conjugal rights of women in India, I, Naina Agarwal, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of the IMPRI Gender Impact Studies Center, GISC, New Delhi. We are grateful to our expert for the day one of this online certificate training program, Professor Veena Vaswani, Advocate Dr. Shalu Nigam, Professor Mala Ramanathan, Professor Vijay Lakshmi Nanda, and Professor Vibhuti Patel for chairing the session. We thank all of our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participate in today's deliberation. We look forward to welcoming you on 23rd December at 2:30 p.m. for our second day of this training course by distinguished expert Professor Vibhuti Patel, Advocate Audrey D. Mello, and Dr. Amar J. Sani. We are grateful if you're watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publication. We hope you continue to join in future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning. Wishing you a good day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
This from the participants for PPT. They want the PPTs to be shared. So just take a note.
We will share the videos and also try to share the, okay.